Christmas morning started with my sister shoving me down our oak staircase. I tumbled 15 steps, my wrist snapping on the banister with a crack that echoed through our decorated hallway. As I lay crumpled at the bottom, ornaments scattered around me, my family burst into laughter. Mom wiped tears from her eyes, saying I was being dramatic. Dad chuckled about my clumsiness. My sister smirked from the top step. Nobody called for help. Nobody checked if I was okay. That was the moment I realized my family saw me as entertainment, not a person. My name is Macy, and I need to tell you how I got to that moment on the stairs. To understand what happened. That Christmas morning, you need to know about my sister Jessica and the way our family worked for 28 years. Jessica was born 3 years before me, and from the second I took my first breath, I was competing for second place. She walked at 10 months. I walked at 13 months, but nobody remembered. She spoke in full sentences by 18 months. I spoke at 2 years, but it was too late to impress anyone. By the time we were in elementary school, the roles were set in stone. Jessica was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the problem child who could do nothing right. In 3rd grade, Jessica won the spelling bee and got a trophy that sat on our mantle for years. When I won the art contest that same year, my painting got hung on the refrigerator for 2 weeks before it was replaced by Jessica's math test with a gold star. When Jessica made cheerleader in high school, Dad took the whole family out for dinner to celebrate. When I got accepted into the National Honor Society for Art, Mom said congratulations and asked me to set the table. Jessica became homecoming queen senior year, and the local newspaper did a feature story about her. The article hung framed in our living room next to her cheerleading photos and academic awards. I graduated valedictorian of my art program and got a full scholarship to design school, but there was no newspaper article, no frame, no celebration dinner. Mom said art school was expensive and impractical, and maybe I should consider something more stable like business or nursing. After college, Jessica landed a marketing job at a prestigious firm in the city. She bought a house in an upscale neighborhood and married her college boyfriend in a wedding that cost more than most people make in a year. Every family gathering revolved around Jessica's latest promotion, Jessica's beautiful home, Jessica's perfect marriage, Jessica's exciting travels. I became a freelance graphic designer working from my small apartment and building my client base, one project at a time. I loved my work, loved the creativity and independence, but to my family, freelancing meant I was unemployed. When I landed major clients or completed successful campaigns, the conversations lasted 30 seconds before switching back to whatever Jessica was doing. The pattern was so ingrained that I stopped trying to compete years ago. I accepted that I was the afterthought, the supporting character in Jessica's starring role. But accepting it and being okay with it were two very different things. Family dinners became exercises in enduring backhanded compliments and thinly veiled criticism. Mom would ask when I was going to get a real job or find a nice man to settle down with, while praising Jessica's latest work achievement or romantic getaway. Dad would lecture me about financial planning and career stability while writing Jessica checks for her mortgage payments. When Jessica bought her second car, a luxury sedan, she didn't need Dad helped with the down payment. When I needed a loan to replace my dying laptop for work, I was told I needed to learn to budget better. When Jessica wanted to redecorate her living room, Mom spent weekends helping her pick out furniture and accessories. When I moved apartments and asked for help, I was told everyone was too busy. The emotional dynamic was even more toxic than the financial favoritism. Jessica could snap at waiters, be rude to family friends, or throw tantrums about minor inconveniences, and it was dismissed as her being passionate or having high standards. If I expressed frustration about anything, I was being negative or difficult. During my college years, I tried to talk to Mom about feeling left out and overlooked. She told me I was imagining things, and that parents don't have favorites. When I pointed out specific examples of different treatment, she said I was keeping score, and that wasn't healthy. She suggested I focus on being more positive and supportive of Jessica's successes instead of being jealous. That conversation taught me that my feelings didn't matter to my family. My perspective was invalid, my experiences were wrong, and my pain was inconvenient. I learned to swallow my hurt and smile through family gatherings where I felt like an outsider looking in on someone else's life. The worst part wasn't even the favoritism itself, it was the gaslighting that came with it. When I noticed patterns of different treatment, I was told I was being oversensitive. When I felt excluded from family decisions or conversations, I was told I was paranoid. When I expressed hurt about being dismissed or ignored, I was told I was creating drama. For years, I questioned my own reality. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the differences in treatment. Maybe I was the problem child they said I was. I internalized their narratives about me being difficult, dramatic, and negative. But deep down, I kept detailed mental notes of every slight, every dismissal, every moment when I was treated as less than. I remembered every time my achievements were minimized, while Jessica's were celebrated. I remembered every time my feelings were dismissed, while Jessica's moods were accommodated. I remembered every time I was expected to apologize for existing, while Jessica was praised for breathing. By the time Christmas morning arrived that year, I had 28 years of evidence that my family saw me as a convenient scapegoat for their dysfunction. What I didn't expect was for Jessica to literally push me down the stairs or for my family to laugh while I lay broken at the bottom. But maybe I should have seen it coming. After all, they had been pushing me around emotionally for decades. The physical push was just the natural progression. The pain in my wrist was excruciating as I picked myself up off the hardwood floor, Christmas ornaments crunching under my knees. Red and gold glass fragments sparkled around me like broken dreams. The laughter from upstairs had faded into casual conversation as if nothing had happened. I cradled my injured arm against my chest and called upstairs. "I think my wrist is broken. I need to go to the hospital." "Oh, stop being such a baby," Jessica's voice floated down dismissively. "You probably just bruised it." Mom appeared at the top of the stairs looking annoyed rather than concerned. "Macy, can you please clean up that mess before you do anything else? Those ornaments were expensive." I stared up at her in disbelief. "Mom, I can't move my wrist. I think it's actually broken." "Well, if you hadn't been so clumsy, this wouldn't have happened," Dad added from the kitchen. "Maybe next time, watch where you're going." The casual cruelty of their responses hit me harder than the fall itself. I gathered my purse with my good hand, grabbed my car keys, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Mom demanded. "We're opening presents in an hour and then you need to start cooking dinner. The turkey won't cook itself." "I'm going to the emergency room," I said quietly. "Well, make it quick," she replied, "and try not to be so dramatic about everything. It's Christmas, for goodness sake." The drive to Mercy General Hospital was a blur of tears and pain. Every bump in the road sent lightning bolts up my arm. I had to shift gears with my left hand, which made my old Honda jerk and stall at traffic lights. Other drivers honked impatiently as I struggled to coordinate the clutch and gear shift with my non-dominant hand. The emergency room was surprisingly quiet for Christmas morning. A few other unfortunate souls sat in plastic chairs nursing various holiday injuries. An older man had apparently cut his hand carving a ham. A young woman was holding an ice pack to her head, probably from a slip on icy steps. The triage nurse was a kind woman named Patricia, who took one look at my swollen, discolored wrist and immediately moved me to the front of the line. "Honey, that definitely needs an X-ray," she said gently. "How did this happen?" I hesitated, embarrassed by the truth. "I fell down the stairs." "At home, were you alone when it happened?" "No, my family was there." I didn't elaborate on their reaction. Patricia led me to an examination room where I waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The walls were decorated with cheerful holiday decorations that seemed inappropriate, given my circumstances. A small plastic Christmas tree sat on the counter, its tiny lights blinking in a rhythm that matched my throbbing pain. Dr. Sarah Martinez entered with a warm smile and gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. She was probably in her 40s with kind brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her scrubs were decorated with tiny reindeer, a touch of whimsy that made her seem approachable. I'm Dr. Martinez. Patricia tells me you took a tumble down some stairs this morning. Let's take a look at that wrist. She examined my arm with careful, practiced movements, asking me to rate my pain and describing what she was feeling for. There's definitely swelling and possible fracture. We'll need x-rays to know for sure, but I'm pretty confident you've broken something. As we waited for the radiology tech, Dr. Martinez made small talk to distract me from the pain. So, Christmas morning injury. That's got to be frustrating. Were you rushing around getting ready for family festivities? Something like that, I said, not wanting to explain the real circumstances. The x-ray process was uncomfortable, but manageable. The tech, a young man named David, was patient and gentle as he positioned my arm for multiple angles. "Try to hold still for just 10 seconds, he said, repeatedly apologizing each time the positioning caused me pain. Back in the examination room, Dr. Martinez returned with the films and a grim expression. "Well, Macy, you've definitely fractured your radius. It's a clean break, which is good news, but it's going to need a cast and several weeks to heal properly." She showed me the x-ray images pointing to the clear line across the bone where it had snapped. The break was about 2 inches from my wrist joint, right where it had hit the banister during my fall. The good news is that it's aligned well, so we won't need surgery, but you'll need a cast for 6 to 8 weeks and then physical therapy to regain full strength and mobility. Dr. Martinez called in a technician to apply the cast, and I chose a basic white color. As the plaster hardened around my arm, she explained the care instructions and handed me a prescription for pain medication. "Is there someone who can drive you home?" she asked. "You really shouldn't be driving with that fresh cast." I considered my options. My family was probably still opening presents and preparing for the Christmas dinner I was supposed to cook. The idea of calling them for help after their earlier reaction seemed pointless. "I'll be fine," I said. "I can manage." Dr. Martinez frowned. "Macy, I have to ask. The way you fell down a full flight of stairs, that's usually the result of a pretty significant impact or loss of balance. Did someone push you?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Something about her genuine concern made me want to tell the truth. "My sister and I were arguing at the top of the stairs. She got angry and gave me a hard shove. I don't think she meant for me to fall all the way down, but..." Dr. Martinez's expression grew serious. "And your family's reaction when they saw you were hurt?" "They laughed," I admitted quietly. "They said I was being dramatic and clumsy." She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her prescription pad and wrote something down. "Macy, I'm going to give you some information about family counseling services and domestic abuse resources. What you've described isn't normal family behavior, even during an argument." She handed me a card along with my discharge paperwork. "This counselor specializes in family dysfunction and abuse dynamics. I think you might find it helpful to talk to someone about what's happening at home." I stared at the card, surprised by the suggestion. I had never thought of my family's treatment as abuse. It was just how things were, how they had always been. "I know it might seem overwhelming to think about right now," Dr. Martinez continued, "but you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by your own family, and especially when you're injured and need support." She sat down beside my examination bed, her voice gentle but firm. "Macy, in 15 years of emergency medicine, I've seen a lot of family dynamics. What you've described, the laughing at your injury, the dismissal of your pain, the expectation that you'll just carry on as normal after being hurt, that's not healthy family behavior." I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. The validation from a medical professional felt surreal after years of being told my feelings were wrong. "Take care of yourself," she said as I prepared to leave, "and please consider making that phone call." As I walked back to my car, cast heavy on my arm, I thought about Dr. Martinez's words. For the first time in my life, someone outside my family had witnessed their behavior and found it concerning. Someone with medical training and experience had looked at my situation and seen red flags. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom as I started the car. "Where are you? We're ready for presents, and then you need to start the turkey. Don't be gone all day." I stared at the message, remembering Dr. Martinez's shocked expression when I described my family's reaction to my injury. The contrast between the doctor's compassion and my mother's impatience was startling. I typed back, "At hospital getting cast for broken wrist. Will be home soon." Her response came immediately, "Well, hurry up. Christmas doesn't wait for anyone and we have a schedule to keep." No concern for my pain, no questions about my diagnosis, no offers to help with dinner preparations given my injury, just irritation at the inconvenience I had caused to her Christmas plans. The drive home was slower and more careful than the trip to the hospital. My cast made shifting gears awkward, and the pain medication hadn't fully kicked in yet. I used the quiet time in the car to process what Dr. Martinez had said about family dynamics and abuse. Was my family abusive? The words seemed too strong, too dramatic. They didn't hit me or scream at me. They just treated me as less important, less worthy of consideration and care. They dismissed my feelings and minimized my experiences. They expected me to accept their treatment without complaint. Maybe that was exactly what Dr. Martinez meant by abuse. Maybe emotional neglect and psychological manipulation were just as damaging as physical violence. Maybe spending 28 years being treated as the family scapegoat had done more damage than I realized. As I pulled into our driveway, I could see through the living room windows. Jessica was sitting on the couch, surrounded by wrapping paper and gifts. Mom and Dad were fussing over her, admiring her presence and laughing at something she said. Nobody looked toward the door as I entered. Nobody asked about my hospital visit or expressed concern about my cast. Jessica glanced up briefly, saw the white plaster on my arm, and smirked. "Well, look who finally decided to come back," Mom said without looking up from Jessica's new jewelry. "You missed present opening, but the turkey still needs to go in the oven." I looked down at Dr. Martinez's card, still clutched in my good hand, and made a decision that would change everything. Walking back into that house with my arm in a fresh cast felt like entering a parallel universe where basic human compassion didn't exist. The living room looked like a gift wrapping explosion had occurred with colorful paper and ribbons scattered across every surface. Jessica sat in the center of it all like a queen holding court, modeling a new cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent. "Oh, good, you're back," Mom said, finally glancing up at me. Her eyes briefly registered the white cast on my arm, but her expression showed more annoyance than concern. "We're running behind schedule now. The turkey should have been in the oven an hour ago." Dad looked up from assembling Jessica's new tablet. "That's quite a cast, kiddo. How long do you have to wear that thing?" 6 to 8 weeks. I replied, waiting for some acknowledgement of how this might affect my daily life, my work, my ability to function normally. "Well, that's inconvenient," Jessica said with a laugh. "Good thing it's your left hand and not your right. You can still cook and work and everything." I stared at her, remembering the moment at the top of the stairs when her hands had made contact with my shoulders and sent me tumbling down 15 oak steps. "Actually, Jessica, it's my right wrist, the one I use for everything, including work." She shrugged dismissively. "Same difference. People adapt. My friend broke her ankle last year and she was back to running marathons in 3 months." The casual way she compared my injury to someone else's recovery, as if all broken bones were interchangeable, made my stomach clench with anger. This was the same person who had caused my injury, and she was already minimizing its impact on my life. "Speaking of adapting," Mom interjected, "you'll need to figure out how to manage Christmas dinner with that cast. We can't change all our plans just because you had a little accident." A little accident. That's how she was framing my sister's assault and my resulting broken bone. Not Jessica's fault, not a serious injury requiring family support, just a minor inconvenience that shouldn't disrupt their holiday celebration. I walked to the kitchen and surveyed the massive meal I was expected to prepare single-handedly with one functioning arm. 20-pound turkey, homemade stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, dinner rolls, and pumpkin pie. Enough food for 8 people, though only 5 of us would be eating. My family had always insisted on elaborate holiday meals, and somehow I had become the designated cook, despite never volunteering for the role. It started when I was in high school and Mom decided I needed to learn domestic skills. By college, it was assumed I would handle all holiday cooking. Now at 28, I was trapped in the role of family caterer without any of the appreciation that should come with the job. Opening the refrigerator with my left hand was awkward and painful. The turkey was massive and unwieldy, requiring 2 hands to lift safely. I managed to wrestle it onto the counter, my cast banging against the cabinet doors as I maneuvered around the small kitchen. From the living room, I could hear my family's cheerful conversation about Jessica's gifts and upcoming vacation plans. Nobody offered to help with meal preparation despite my obvious physical limitations. Nobody suggested ordering takeout or simplifying the menu given the circumstances. Preparing the stuffing was a nightmare with one hand. Chopping onions and celery required careful coordination to hold vegetables steady, while wielding a knife with my non-dominant hand. I moved slowly and deliberately, terrified of adding a severed finger to my list of Christmas injuries. "How's it coming in there?" Dad called from the living room. "We're getting hungry." I glanced at the clock. It was barely noon and they expected dinner at 3 o'clock. Even with 2 functioning hands, that timeline would be challenging for such an elaborate meal. It might be ready a little later than usual. I called back, struggling to stuff the turkey cavity while holding the bird steady with my cast. "Well, try to keep on schedule," Mom replied. "Jessica has plans tonight and can't stay late." Of course. Jessica's social calendar took precedence over my physical limitations. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow I still felt a stab of hurt at the casual dismissal of my injury. The next few hours were a blur of exhausting one-handed cooking. I dropped a casserole dish while trying to transfer it to the oven, sending green beans and almonds scattering across the kitchen floor. While cleaning up the mess, I had to kneel carefully to avoid putting weight on my cast. "Everything okay in there?" Jessica called sweetly. That was quite a crash. "Just drop something," I replied, biting back the urge to mention that I wouldn't have dropped it if I had 2 working hands. "Try to be more careful," Mom added. "We don't need any more messes today." More messes, as if my broken wrist was a mess I had created through carelessness rather than an injury inflicted by their precious daughter. When I finally called everyone to dinner at 4:30, 90 minutes late, the reaction was immediate criticism rather than gratitude. "This turkey is overcooked," Dad announced after his first bite. "The potatoes could use more salt," Mom added, reaching for the shaker. "Why is there no gravy?" Jessica asked, surveying the table. I looked at the feast I had somehow managed to prepare, despite my injury, despite the lack of help, despite their complete indifference to my physical limitations. "I couldn't manage gravy with one hand. Everything else you mentioned can be fixed." "Well, it's not the same without gravy," Jessica pouted. "Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner need gravy. It's like tradition." "Next time, maybe plan better," Mom suggested. "You knew you were injured, but you didn't adjust the menu accordingly." Next time. They were already planning for me to cook future holiday meals while recovering from the injury their daughter had caused. During dinner, Jessica regaled everyone with stories about her recent work promotion and upcoming business trip to Europe. She described expensive restaurants she planned to visit and designer shopping she intended to do. Everyone hung on her every word, asking follow-up questions and expressing enthusiasm for her adventures. When there was a brief lull in Jessica's monologue, I mentioned that my biggest client had just approved a major rebranding project that would keep me busy through the spring. "That's nice, dear," Mom said absently, then immediately turned back to Jessica. "Tell us more about that conference you're attending in Paris." My professional achievement, which represented months of hard work and significant income, merited exactly 3 words of acknowledgement before the conversation pivoted back to Jessica's glamorous life. As we ate, Jessica began making jokes about my morning fall. "You should have seen Macy tumbling down those stairs," she told Dad with exaggerated hand gestures. "Arms and legs everywhere like something from a cartoon." Everyone laughed appreciatively as if my pain and injury were a hilarious slapstick routine designed for their entertainment. The sound her wrist made when it hit the banister. Jessica continued making a cracking noise with her tongue against her teeth. So dramatic. More laughter from Mom and Dad. I sat frozen watching my family treat my trauma as comedy material, while the person responsible for my injury performed the story like a stand-up routine. And then she just laid there moaning and carrying on, Jessica added, putting on an exaggerated voice to mimic me. "Oh, my wrist, I think it's broken." "Well, it was broken," I said quietly. "Yeah, but you were being so melodramatic about it," Jessica replied. "Like, we get it, you're hurt, but you don't have to make such a production out of everything." I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket, but ignored it too, stunned by my family's continued cruelty to focus on anything else. They were literally mocking my pain while eating the meal I had prepared for them, despite being injured. When dinner finally ended, I began clearing plates with my good hand while my family returned to the living room to continue their conversation about Jessica's exciting life. "Don't forget to wrap up some leftovers for Jessica to take home," Mom called from the couch. "She loves your cooking." My cooking. The meal they had just spent an hour criticizing was suddenly worth taking home when Jessica wanted it. As I scraped plates and loaded the dishwasher one-handed, I pulled out my phone to check the missed message. It was from Dr. Martinez at the hospital. "Hi, Macy, this is Dr. Martinez from your visit today. I wanted to follow up and make sure you're managing okay with your cast. I hope your family was more supportive once they saw the severity of your injury. Please don't hesitate to call if you need anything or want to discuss those resources we talked about." I stared at the message, struck by the contrast between the doctor's genuine concern and my family's complete indifference. A stranger who had spent 30 minutes with me was more worried about my well-being than the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I quietly started my phone's voice recorder and slipped it into my pocket. If Dr. Martinez was right about my family's behavior being abnormal, maybe I needed to document exactly what that behavior looked like. From the living room, Jessica's voice carried into the kitchen. "Honestly, I don't know why Macy makes such a big deal out of every little thing. It's like she enjoys being the victim." "She's always been overly sensitive," Mom agreed. "Remember when she cried for hours because we forgot her birthday dinner that one year?" "That wasn't sensitivity," Dad chimed in. "That was manipulation. She wanted attention and sympathy." I stood at the sink washing dishes with one hand while listening to my family psychoanalyze my emotional responses to their neglect and cruelty. They weren't just dismissing my current injury, they were reframing years of painful experiences as character flaws on my part. When Jessica finally left for her evening plans, she hugged Mom and Dad goodbye with elaborate affection. She walked past me at the kitchen sink without a word, not even acknowledging the meal I had prepared or the injury she had caused. As her car pulled out of the driveway, Mom came into the kitchen where I was still cleaning up. "I hope you're not going to let this little mishap affect your attitude going forward," she said, watching me struggle with the pots and pans. "We don't need you walking around with a chip on your shoulder about something that was clearly an accident." An accident? Despite hearing Jessica's jokes about pushing me down the stairs, Mom was still characterizing my injury as an unfortunate mishap rather than an assault by her golden child. "I'm not sure it was an accident, Mom," I said carefully. Her expression hardened immediately. "Macy, I won't have you starting drama and making accusations. Jessica would never hurt you on purpose, and suggesting otherwise is inappropriate and hurtful." The message was clear. Questioning Jessica's actions was off limits even when those actions resulted in my broken bones. My perspective on my own assault was inappropriate, but Jessica's gleeful retelling of my fall was perfectly acceptable family entertainment. That night, lying in bed with my throbbing wrist elevated on pillows, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The fall, the laughter, the hospital visit, the struggle to cook dinner, the mocking of my pain, the casual dismissal of my injury. For 28 years, I had normalized my family's treatment because it was all I knew. But Dr. Martinez's reaction to my story had planted a seed of doubt about what was normal and what was acceptable. Maybe it was time to find out what healthy families actually looked like. 2 days after Christmas, I couldn't take the silence anymore. My wrist throbbed constantly despite the pain medication, and my family continued treating me like nothing had happened. They discussed Jessica's European vacation plans over breakfast while I struggled to butter toast with my left hand. They planned New Year's Eve celebrations while I figured out how to shower without getting my cast wet. The complete lack of acknowledgement that I was injured, that I needed help, that my life had been significantly impacted by Jessica's actions finally pushed me to my breaking point. I found Mom alone in the kitchen Wednesday morning reading the newspaper with her coffee. Dad had left for his office and Jessica was at her own house, probably planning her next social media posts about her fabulous holiday gifts. "Mom, I need to talk to you about what happened Christmas morning," I said, sitting down across from her at the breakfast table. She didn't look up from the paper. "What about it?" "You fell down the stairs and broke your wrist. These things happen." "I didn't fall, Mom. Jessica pushed me." Now she looked up, her expression immediately defensive. "Macy, that's a serious accusation. Jessica would never do something like that." "She did do something like that. I was standing at the top of the stairs and she got angry about something and shoved me with both hands, hard enough to send me tumbling down 15 steps. Mom set down her newspaper with an exaggerated sigh. Even if there was some kind of sibling scuffle, it was clearly an accident. Jessica didn't mean for you to get hurt. "But I did get hurt, Mom. I broke my wrist, and when I was lying on the floor in pain, you all laughed. You didn't call for help. You didn't check if I was okay. You didn't even seem concerned that I might be seriously injured." "Oh, Macy, you're being so dramatic. We could see you were moving around and talking. It wasn't like you were unconscious or bleeding everywhere." The casual dismissal of my pain felt like another slap across the face. According to Mom's logic, unless I was unconscious or hemorrhaging, my injury didn't warrant concern or compassion. "Mom, I drove myself to the hospital with a broken bone because my own family wouldn't help me. The doctor asked if someone pushed me because she couldn't believe a family would react the way you did." "Well, that doctor doesn't know our family dynamics. We don't coddle each other around here. We're tougher than that." "Tough?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Is that what you call it when your daughter is injured and needs support?" "Macy, life is hard, and the sooner you learn to handle things on your own, the better off you'll be. We're not doing you any favors by babying you every time you have a minor setback." A minor setback? My broken wrist, my inability to work properly, my struggles with basic daily activities were all just a minor setback that I should handle without support from my family. "Mom, this isn't about babying anyone. It's about basic human decency. When someone you love gets hurt, you help them. You show concern. You don't laugh at their pain." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same expression she used when examining expired milk. "Macy, I think you're the one with the problem here. You've always been overly sensitive, and now you're looking for reasons to be upset with us." "I'm not looking for reasons. I'm trying to understand why my own mother thinks it's acceptable for one daughter to assault another daughter and then mock the injured person while she struggles to take care of herself." Mom's face flushed with anger. "Assault? Did you just accuse Jessica of assault? That's absolutely ridiculous, Macy. You're talking about your sister like she's some kind of criminal. She pushed me down a flight of stairs and broke my wrist. In legal terms, that is assault." "In legal terms," Mom repeated mockingly. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about pressing charges against your own sister for a family argument that got a little out of hand." "I'm not talking about pressing charges. I'm talking about acknowledgement. I'm talking about Jessica taking responsibility for what she did and apologizing. I'm talking about you recognizing that what happened was wrong." Mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "You know what's wrong, Macy. This attitude you've developed. This victim mentality where everything is someone else's fault and everyone owes you something. I don't think asking for an apology after being injured is a victim mentality. It is when you're making mountains out of molehills and trying to turn an accident into some kind of family crisis." She paced to the kitchen counter, her back to me. "Jessica feels terrible about what happened, but she's not going to grovel and beg forgiveness for something that wasn't entirely her fault." "How was it not entirely her fault? She's the one who pushed me." Mom whipped around to face me. "You were probably standing too close to the stairs. You probably said something to provoke her. You probably lost your balance because you're clumsy. There are two sides to every story, Macy. I sat in stunned silence as my mother listed all the ways my assault was actually my fault. I was too close to the stairs, as if there was a safe distance from stairs that would prevent injury during an assault. I provoked Jessica as if words justified physical violence. I was clumsy, as if my coordination skills had anything to do with being shoved. Mom, are you seriously blaming me for Jessica pushing me down the stairs? I'm saying these situations are never as black and white as you want to make them. Jessica is dealing with a lot of stress at work right now. She's under enormous pressure with her promotion and her upcoming travel. The last thing she needs is her little sister trying to make her feel guilty about an accident. An accident that was somehow simultaneously my fault for provoking it, Jessica's understandable reaction to work stress, and a random mishap that nobody could have prevented. The mental gymnastics required to absolve Jessica of all responsibility while placing blame on me was impressive in its creativity. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said slowly. Jessica pushed me down the stairs because she's stressed about work. It's my fault for provoking her, and I should feel bad for Jessica because she has to deal with the guilt of accidentally breaking my wrist. You're twisting my words, Macy. I'm trying to help you see the bigger picture here. The bigger picture where I'm responsible for my own assault and should comfort my attacker. Mom slammed her coffee mug down on the counter. There you go again with that word, assault. You make it sound like Jessica beat you up in an alley somewhere. She physically attacked me and caused serious injury. The location doesn't change what happened. She gave you a little push during an argument. These things happen between siblings. These things happen in dysfunctional families, Mom. Normal siblings don't send each other to the hospital. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I had crossed a line by suggesting our family was dysfunctional, and Mom's face showed her fury at the implication. Dysfunctional. Her voice was dangerously quiet. You think this family is dysfunctional because we don't treat you like a fragile flower who needs constant attention and sympathy. I think this family is dysfunctional because one daughter can assault another daughter and face no consequences, while the victim is blamed for causing her own injury. Victim, Mom spat. There's that word again. You love playing the victim, don't you, Macy? It gives you an excuse to feel sorry for yourself and blame everyone else for your problems. What problems am I blaming on everyone else? Your lack of a real career, your lack of a husband, your lack of financial stability. Instead of taking responsibility for your own choices, you want to blame us for not supporting you enough. I stared at her, recognizing the conversation was spiraling into familiar territory where my life choices became ammunition against me. Somehow we had gone from discussing Jessica's assault to analyzing my career and relationship status. Mom, this conversation is about Jessica breaking my wrist, not about my job or my dating life. Everything is connected, Macy. Your attitude, your sensitivity, your inability to handle normal family interactions. You've always been the difficult one, and now you're trying to make that our fault. The difficult one. There it was, the label that had followed me since childhood. I was difficult for having feelings, difficult for wanting acknowledgement, difficult for expecting basic consideration and respect. I've been the difficult one because I react normally to abnormal treatment. I said, surprised by the clarity of my own words. Mom's laugh was sharp and bitter. Listen to yourself. Abnormal treatment. We fed you, clothed, you sent you to school, supported you through college. We've given you everything, and you want to complain about our parenting style because we didn't shower you with enough praise. This isn't about praise, Mom. It's about respect. It's about treating me like my feelings matter, like my experiences are valid, like my physical well-being is important to you. Your physical well-being is fine. You have a broken wrist, not a terminal illness. People break bones every day and manage to cope without making their entire family feel guilty about it. I realized in that moment that we were speaking completely different languages. She genuinely didn't understand why I expected concern, support, or acknowledgement after being injured by my own sister. In her worldview, my expectations were unreasonable and my pain was inconsequential. "Mom, do you love me?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Of course I love you. You're my daughter." "Do you like me?" She paused for a long moment, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. "Macy, I love you, but I don't always like your attitude or your behavior. You can be negative, critical, and exhausting to deal with. You take everything personally and turn minor issues into major dramas. Like expecting an apology after being pushed down the stairs. Like making your sister's moment of anger into a federal case instead of accepting that accidents happen and moving on with your life." There it was again. Jessica's moment of anger was understandable and forgivable, while my request for acknowledgement was dramatic and unreasonable. "What would you do, Mom, if Dad pushed you down the stairs and broke your wrist?" "Your father would never do such a thing." "But if he did, hypothetically, what would you expect from him afterward?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the scenario. "I suppose I would expect him to apologize and make sure I was okay." "Right. You would expect basic concern and accountability from your partner. So why don't you expect the same from Jessica?" "Because marriage is different from sibling relationships. Spouses have different obligations to each other." "What obligations do siblings have to each other?" To get along reasonably well and not hold grudges over minor incidents." Is breaking someone's wrist a minor incident? It is when it was clearly accidental and the person responsible feels bad about what happened. How do you know Jessica feels bad? Has she said anything to suggest she feels guilty or sorry? Mom hesitated again, and I realized Jessica probably hadn't expressed any remorse at all. "She doesn't need to grovel, Macy. Some people show their feelings differently." "So Jessica shows remorse by making jokes about my fall and calling me dramatic. She's dealing with her own emotions about what happened." I leaned forward in my chair, trying one last time to break through the wall of denial and justification that surrounded my mother's worldview. "Mom, I need you to hear what I'm saying. Your daughter pushed me down a flight of stairs. I broke my wrist. Instead of helping me or showing concern, you all laughed at my pain. When I asked for acknowledgement that this was wrong, you blamed me for causing it. That's not normal family behavior." Mom stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through anger, frustration, and something that might have been recognition. Then she shook her head firmly. "You know what I think, Macy? I think you need to talk to someone about this obsession with blame and victimhood. Maybe a therapist can help you develop some perspective and coping skills. You think I need therapy because I want my sister to apologize for breaking my wrist. I think you need therapy because you're turning a family argument into a reason to hate us all. That's not healthy, and it's not fair to the rest of us." I stared at my mother, finally understanding that no amount of logic or explanation would make her see the situation clearly. In her mind, I was the problem. I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. Jessica was stressed and deserved understanding, while I deserved criticism for expecting basic human decency. "You're right, Mom. I should talk to someone about this." "Good. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about getting help." "I should talk to someone about what it's like to grow up in a family where one child is treated like royalty, while the other is treated like a burden. I should talk to someone about what it does to a person's self-worth when their own mother thinks they deserve to be pushed downstairs." "Macy, that's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said. You said it was my fault for provoking Jessica, my fault for standing too close to the stairs, my fault for being clumsy, and my fault for expecting an apology." I stood up from the table, my cast heavy on my arm. "Thank you for making it clear where I stand in this family's hierarchy. It's good to know that even when Jessica literally breaks my bones, I'm still the one who needs to change. Don't walk away from me, young lady. We're not finished with this conversation." "Yes, we are, Mom. We finished it the moment you decided Jessica's comfort was more important than my broken wrist." I left her sitting at the kitchen table, probably planning how to spin this conversation to make me sound unreasonable when she reported back to Dad and Jessica. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what story she told about me. I had finally heard my mother's true feelings about me, and they matched what I had suspected for years. I was the difficult daughter who asked for too much and deserved too little. I was the problem child who needed to be fixed, not the injured child who needed to be loved. Dr. Martinez's card was still in my purse, and for the first time since she gave it to me, I was ready to make that phone call. 3 days after my devastating conversation with Mom, I decided to pack up my childhood bedroom. Living at home temporarily while I recovered from my wrist injury had become unbearable, and I needed to gather my remaining belongings before finding somewhere else to stay. My old room hadn't changed much since high school. The same pale yellow walls, the same white furniture, the same bookshelf filled with art supplies and sketch pads from my teenage years. But unlike Jessica's room, which had been preserved like a shrine to her achievements, mine had become a storage space for Christmas decorations and old household items. I was pulling boxes out of my closet with my good hand when I noticed something wedged behind the back panel. Using a coat hanger, I managed to fish out a manila folder that had apparently fallen back there years ago. The folder was thick with papers, and when I opened it, I felt like I was looking at artifacts from another person's life. Inside were report cards, teacher evaluations, school newsletters, and academic awards, spanning my elementary through high school years. My third-grade report card showed straight A's with a teacher's note. Macy is an exceptional student with remarkable creativity and empathy. She helps struggling classmates and always completes her work with care and enthusiasm. 4th grade. Macy's artistic abilities are extraordinary for her age. She thinks deeply about complex topics and expresses herself with unusual maturity. 5th grade. Macy is a natural leader who brings out the best in others. Her kindness and intelligence make her a joy to teach. 6th grade. Macy's writing shows sophisticated emotional understanding. She has a gift for connecting with people and seeing multiple perspectives. Page after page of glowing evaluations that painted a picture of a bright, talented, compassionate child. This was not the difficult, problematic daughter my parents had described to me my entire life. I found copies of poems I had written that were published in the school literary magazine, short stories that had won local contests, art projects that had been displayed in regional exhibitions, academic achievements I had completely forgotten about because they were never celebrated at home. Then I found the scholarship letters. The first was from the State University art program dated my senior year of high school. Dear Macy, congratulations on your acceptance to our prestigious Fine Arts Scholar program. This full scholarship covers tuition, room, board, and supplies for 4 years. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. I'd never seen this before. I had never known I was accepted into this program, let alone offered a full scholarship. The second letter was from a private art institute in California. We are pleased to offer you the Creativity Excellence Scholarship, which includes full tuition plus a living stipend for 4 years of study. A third letter from a renowned design school in New York. Your portfolio demonstrates exceptional talent and vision. We would be honored to have you join our program with full financial support. 4 different schools. 4 full scholarship offers, all dated my senior year. All opportunities I had never heard about, never had the chance to consider, never knew existed. I remembered my senior year clearly. I had applied to several art schools but was told we couldn't afford the tuition. My parents had insisted I attend the local community college for my first 2 years to save money before transferring to a state school for a practical degree. I had been devastated but accepted their financial concerns as legitimate. I thought my art wasn't good enough for scholarship consideration. I thought my dreams of attending a prestigious program were unrealistic and selfish. But I had been good enough. I had been scholarship-worthy. My parents had simply hidden the evidence from me. Digging deeper in the folder, I found something even more disturbing. Email printouts dated from my senior year between my parents and my high school guidance counselor. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Parker. The first email read, I wanted to follow up on Macy's scholarship opportunities. She has received several impressive offers that would provide her with excellent education and career prospects. When would be a good time to meet and discuss these options? My father's reply, "Thank you for your concern, but we've decided Macy would benefit from staying closer to home for college. We won't be pursuing any out-of-state opportunities." The counselor's response, "I understand family considerations, but these are exceptional opportunities that could dramatically impact Macy's future. The scholarship offers are substantial and her talent is remarkable. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss the details." My mother's reply, "We appreciate your enthusiasm for Macy's work, but we know what's best for our daughter. She needs to learn responsibility and practical skills before pursuing artistic fantasies. We've made our decision." Artistic fantasies. My mother had described my talent, my passion, my potential career as artistic fantasies not worth pursuing. I found more email exchanges where the counselor tried repeatedly to advocate for me, explaining the value of the scholarship opportunities and the strength of my artistic abilities. Each time my parents shut down the conversation with variations of the same theme, they knew what was best for me, and what was best was giving up my dreams. The final email from the counselor was heartbreaking. "I respect your decision as Macy's parents, though I believe she has extraordinary potential that deserves nurturing. I hope you'll reconsider allowing her to at least know about these opportunities so she can make her own choice." My mother's final response was cold and definitive. "Macy is too immature to make these kinds of decisions. She needs structure and guidance, not encouragement to chase unrealistic goals. Please do not contact her directly about these scholarships." I sat on my childhood bedroom floor surrounded by evidence that my entire educational trajectory had been sabotaged by my own parents. They had actively prevented me from knowing about opportunities that could have changed my life. But there was more. I found a folder labeled medical records that contained my childhood doctor visits and psychological evaluations. Apparently, several teachers had recommended I be tested for the gifted program in elementary school. The psychological evaluation conducted when I was 8 years old contained startling conclusions. Macy demonstrates exceptional intellectual and creative abilities, scoring in the 98th percentile for her age group. She shows remarkable emotional intelligence and empathy. We recommend immediate placement in the gifted education program. The school's recommendation letter urged my parents to support advanced academic opportunities for me. Macy would thrive in an accelerated learning environment. Her intellectual abilities require more challenging coursework to prevent boredom and underachievement. I had never been placed in gifted programs. I had never been told I scored in the 98th percentile of anything. I had been kept in regular classes while being told I was average, ordinary, nothing special. Meanwhile, Jessica had been enrolled in every advanced program available, tutored extensively, and constantly praised for her intelligence and achievements. I found more evidence that my parents had systematically undermined my development. Music teachers had recommended I join advanced ensembles, but my parents declined. Art instructors had suggested special summer programs, but my parents said we couldn't afford them while simultaneously paying for Jessica's expensive tennis camps and music lessons. College counselors had encouraged me to apply for academic scholarships based on my grades and test scores, but my parents insisted I wasn't scholarship material. The pattern was clear and devastating. Every opportunity for advancement, every recognition of my abilities, every chance to develop my potential had been blocked by my parents, while similar opportunities were actively pursued for Jessica. In the very back of the folder, I found something that made my blood run cold. A series of handwritten notes in my mother's distinctive script, apparently copied from a parenting book or magazine article. Strategies for Managing Sibling Rivalry. The title read, below that bullet points in my mother's handwriting. Keep the problem child humble to prevent attention-seeking behavior. Don't allow the difficult child to outshine the good child. This creates family disruption. Limit praise for the problem child to prevent ego inflation. Focus family resources on the child most likely to succeed. The squeaky wheel shouldn't get the grease. This rewards bad behavior. The problem child, the difficult child, the squeaky wheel, all references to me written in my mother's hand as strategies for managing our family dynamics. But the most damning evidence was on the last page, a list titled, "Keeping Macy in Line." Don't tell her about scholarship opportunities. College away from home would make her harder to control. Minimize her achievements so she doesn't get ideas above her station. Always redirect attention back to Jessica's successes. If Macy complains about treatment, label her as ungrateful or oversensitive. Make sure she knows Jessica is the family priority. I stared at this list for a long time, reading and rereading the calculated cruelty of my parents' approach to raising me. This wasn't unconscious favoritism or accidental neglect. This was deliberate, systematic emotional abuse designed to keep me subordinate and compliant. They had stolen my opportunities, hidden my achievements, and gaslit me into believing I was the problem. They had spent 28 years implementing a carefully planned strategy to undermine my potential and keep me trapped in the role of family scapegoat. The worst part was how effective their strategy had been. I had internalized their messages about being difficult and problematic. I had accepted their version of reality where Jessica was naturally superior and I was naturally flawed. I had spent years blaming myself for not being good enough, not trying hard enough, not deserving the same love and support they gave Jessica. But the truth was that I had never been given a fair chance to succeed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom says you're being dramatic about Christmas again. Get over it already." I looked at the message, then at the evidence spread across my bedroom floor, and felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't questioning my own perceptions or wondering if I was overreacting. I was angry, furiously, righteously angry. I took photos of every document in the folder, especially the handwritten notes about keeping me in line. Then I carefully returned everything to the folder and hid it in my purse. This wasn't just evidence of favoritism or poor parenting choices. This was documentation of a deliberate campaign to sabotage my life while elevating Jessica's. And now I had proof. The next morning, I called the number on Dr. Martinez's card. My hand was shaking as I dialed, partly from nervousness and partly from rage at everything I had discovered in my childhood bedroom. "Family Wellness Center, this is Amanda speaking. Hi, I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Patricia Hendricks. I was referred by Dr. Sarah Martinez from Mercy General Hospital." "Of course. Dr. Hendricks has an opening this afternoon at 2 o'clock if you're available." I was more than available. I was desperate to talk to someone who might help me make sense of the evidence I had found and the family dynamics I was finally starting to understand clearly. Dr. Patricia Hendricks' office was nothing like I had expected. Instead of a sterile clinical space, it felt like a comfortable living room with soft lighting plants in every corner and artwork that actually looked encouraging rather than generic. Dr. Hendricks herself was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Please call me Patricia," she said as I settled into a plush chair across from her desk. "Dr. Martinez mentioned you were dealing with some family issues following an injury. Would you like to tell me what brought you here today?" I started with Christmas morning, describing Jessica's push the fall, my broken wrist, and my family's reaction. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more concerned as my story progressed. After I got home from the hospital, no one in my family seemed to care that I was injured. They expected me to cook Christmas dinner with one hand, and when I struggled, they criticized the food instead of offering help. "That must have felt very isolating," Patricia said gently. "How did your family respond when you tried to discuss your feelings about what happened?" I told her about my conversation with Mom, how every attempt to get acknowledgement or accountability was turned back on me as evidence that I was dramatic, oversensitive, and problematic. Yesterday, I found some documents in my old bedroom that shed new light on my family's treatment of me over the years. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos of the report card scholarship letters, and most importantly, the handwritten notes about keeping me humble and in line. Patricia studied the images carefully, her eyebrows rising as she read my mother's strategic notes about managing sibling rivalry. "Macy, what you're showing me is documentation of systematic emotional abuse and deliberate sabotage of your development," she said finally. This isn't favoritism or unconscious bias. This is calculated psychological manipulation. Hearing a professional use the word abuse to describe my childhood was both validating and terrifying. I had spent so many years wondering if I was overreacting to normal family dynamics. My parents always said I was the difficult child, the one with problems. They made me believe that Jessica was naturally better than me and that I needed to accept my lesser role in the family. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Macy, what you're describing is called scapegoating. In dysfunctional family systems, one child is designated as the problem, while another child is idealized. The scapegoated child receives blame for family dysfunction, while the golden child can do no wrong. That describes my family exactly. Jessica is the golden child who gets praised for everything, and I'm the scapegoat who gets blamed for everything. The evidence you found suggests this wasn't accidental. Your parents deliberately withheld opportunities from you while providing every advantage to your sister. They actively undermined your self-esteem and potential. Patricia explained how scapegoating serves a function in dysfunctional families. When there's underlying dysfunction, conflict, or mental illness in a family system, designating one member as the problem allows everyone else to avoid dealing with the real issues. So, by making me the difficult one, they could ignore whatever was actually wrong with our family. Exactly. Your role was to absorb all the family's dysfunction and negative emotions. Jessica's role was to make the family look successful and normal from the outside. I thought about all the times my parents had bragged about Jessica's achievements to friends and relatives, while barely mentioning my existence. Our family's public image was built entirely on Jessica's success, while my failures were used as cautionary tales. The notes your mother wrote about keeping you humble and limiting your opportunities suggest a deliberate effort to maintain this dynamic, Patricia continued. They needed you to stay in the subordinate role for the system to function. But why would parents want to sabotage one child's success? Patricia considered the question carefully. Sometimes it's about control. If you had succeeded academically and moved away for college, you wouldn't have been available to serve as the family scapegoat. Sometimes it's about competition. Perhaps your mother felt threatened by your talents or potential. Or maybe they genuinely believed Jessica was more worthy of investment and support. That's possible too. In narcissistic family systems, children are often seen as extensions of the parents rather than individuals with their own rights and potential. Jessica's success reflected well on them, while your independent artistic pursuits might have felt threatening or embarrassing. Patricia pulled out a book and opened it to a marked page. I'd like you to read this list of characteristics common in scapegoated children and tell me which ones resonate with you. The list was like reading my own biography. Blamed for family problems they didn't create. Constantly criticized while siblings are praised. Made to feel responsible for others' emotions and reactions. Told they are too sensitive when they express hurt. Expected to apologize even when they are the victim. Achievements minimized while failures are highlighted. Treated as the family therapist or emotional caretaker. Punished more severely than siblings for similar behaviors. Made to feel grateful for basic care and attention. All of them, I whispered. Every single one describes my experience. Scapegoating is a form of psychological abuse that can cause lasting damage to a person's self-worth, ability to trust their own perceptions, and capacity for healthy relationships, Patricia explained. The fact that you're recognizing these patterns is actually a sign of strength and healing. But how do I know if my perceptions are accurate? My family has spent my whole life telling me that I'm wrong about everything, that I misunderstand situations, that I'm too sensitive. That's called gaslighting, and it's a common tool used to maintain scapegoating dynamics. The goal is to make you doubt your own reality so you'll accept their version of events. Patricia handed me a worksheet titled Reality Testing Exercise. I want you to write down specific examples of incidents where your family told you that you were wrong about your own experience. Then we'll examine the evidence objectively. I spent the next 20 minutes filling out the worksheet detailing years of being told I was misremembering, misunderstanding, or misinterpreting situations. The pattern was clear. Once I saw it written down, anytime I challenged their treatment of me, I was immediately told that my perspective was faulty. What you're describing is systematic invalidation designed to keep you compliant and doubting yourself, Patricia said after reviewing my responses. Healthy families might disagree about details of events, but they don't consistently tell one member that their entire perception of reality is wrong. So, I'm not crazy for thinking my family treats me badly. You're not crazy at all. In fact, your ability to recognize and question these patterns shows remarkable psychological resilience. Many people in your situation never develop the awareness to see the abuse clearly. Patricia explained that children who grow up in scapegoating situations often develop hypervigilance about others' emotions, people-pleasing behaviors, and difficulty setting boundaries. Does that sound familiar? It sounded like my entire personality. I had spent my life walking on eggshells trying to anticipate what others needed, apologizing constantly, and accepting treatment I knew felt wrong because I didn't trust my own judgment. The good news is that these patterns can be changed once you understand them, Patricia said. The first step is recognizing that the problem isn't with you. It's with the family system that cast you in this role. But what do I do with this information? How do I have relationships with people who have systematically abused me for 28 years? That's something we'll work on together over time. But right now, your immediate goal should be protecting yourself from further psychological harm while you process what you've learned. Patricia gave me several homework assignments. Keep a daily journal of family interactions, to practice reality testing, research, narcissistic family dynamics to better understand the patterns, and most importantly, start setting small boundaries to see how my family responded. The way they react to healthy boundaries will tell you a lot about whether change is possible in these relationships, she explained. What if they react badly? Then you'll have important information about their willingness to treat you with respect. Remember Macy, you're not responsible for managing their emotions or maintaining family peace. Those were roles imposed on you as a child, but you're an adult now with the right to protect your own well-being. As I left Patricia's office, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. For the first time in my life, I had language to describe what had happened to me. I understood that my family's treatment wasn't normal, wasn't my fault, and wasn't something I had to continue accepting. But I also knew that challenging a family system that had operated the same way for decades would have serious consequences. My family would not appreciate having their scapegoat suddenly refuse to play her assigned role. The question was whether I was strong enough to handle their reaction when I started standing up for myself. After 28 years of conditioning to doubt my own perceptions and prioritize everyone else's comfort, learning to put my own well-being first felt like trying to speak a foreign language. But as I drove home with Patricia's words echoing in my mind, I realized I didn't have a choice anymore. Now that I understood what had been done to me, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't go back to being the family scapegoat because I finally understood that role had never been about my deficiencies. It had been about their dysfunction all along. 2 days after my revelation session with Patricia, I was in my apartment trying to work on a client project when I heard shouting from the house next door. My parents lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where loud arguments were rare, so the commotion caught my attention. I was staying temporarily in the small apartment above my parents' garage while recovering from my wrist injury, which meant I had an unwanted front row seat to family drama. Through my window, I could see Jessica's luxury sedan parked in our parents' driveway at an unusual angle, as if she had pulled in hastily. The shouting was coming from inside the house, and I could hear Jessica's voice rising above the others. I tried to focus on my computer screen, but the argument was loud enough that I couldn't help but overhear. Jessica was crying, which was shocking in itself, since I had rarely seen her show vulnerability in our entire lives. "I can't believe this is happening," she sobbed. "Everything is falling apart and I don't know what to do." Mom's voice was soothing and concerned in a way I had never heard her use with me. "Sweetheart, calm down and tell us what happened. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." "David filed for divorce," Jessica wailed. "He said he's been unhappy for months and he can't pretend anymore. He wants half of everything, including the house." I froze at my computer. Jessica's marriage to David had been held up as the gold standard of romantic success for the past 5 years. Every family gathering included updates about their exotic vacations, expensive renovations, and perfect compatibility. "That bastard!" Dad's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "After everything you've done for him, after all the money we've put into that house." "It gets worse," Jessica continued through her tears. "Remember that harassment complaint I mentioned at work? Well, it's not going away like I thought it would. They're opening a full investigation and my boss says I might be suspended pending the outcome." My hands stilled on my keyboard. Jessica had mentioned a harassment complaint at Christmas, but she had described it as a minor misunderstanding that would blow over quickly. "What exactly did you do?" Mom asked, her voice tight with worry. "I didn't do anything wrong," Jessica said defensively. "There's this guy in my department, Marcus, who's been gunning for my promotion for months. He's trying to sabotage me by making false accusations." "What kind of accusations?" Dad pressed. There was a long pause before Jessica answered. "He says I created a hostile work environment, that I made inappropriate comments about his race and questioned his qualifications for projects. He recorded some of our conversations without my permission." I felt my stomach drop. Jessica was describing what sounded like legitimate workplace discrimination, not the petty office politics she had initially portrayed. "Those recordings could be taken out of context," Mom said quickly. "I'm sure when people hear your side of the story, they'll understand you were just being direct and professional." "That's what I thought too," Jessica replied, her voice breaking again. "But HR showed me some of the transcripts and they sound bad. Really bad. Like I was deliberately trying to undermine him." "Well, were you?" Dad asked bluntly. "I was trying to protect my own interests," Jessica snapped. "Marcus is ambitious and talented, and I felt like he was trying to push me out. So yes, I may have questioned his ideas more than I should have, and maybe I made some comments about diversity hires, but I never meant anything malicious." Diversity hires. I cringed at the casual racism in Jessica's explanation, delivered as if her discriminatory comments were reasonable professional tactics. "The point is," Jessica continued, "my career is basically over. Even if I don't get fired, my reputation is ruined. No one will want to work with me after this." "Surely there's something we can do," Mom said. "A lawyer or talking to someone higher up in the company?" "I already talked to a lawyer," Jessica replied miserably. "He said the recordings are probably admissible and my comments are clear evidence of discriminatory intent. He recommended I start looking for a new job before I get fired." The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents offering various schemes to salvage Jessica's career and marriage. They discussed hiring expensive lawyers, calling in favors with family connections, and finding ways to discredit Marcus's allegations. What struck me most was the tone of the conversation. There was no suggestion that Jessica should take responsibility for her actions or consider how her behavior had affected others. The entire focus was on protecting her from consequences and finding ways to blame external forces for her problems. When Jessica finally left, slamming the front door behind her, I sat in my apartment processing what I had overheard. The sister who had been held up as the perfect example of success and character was apparently a racist bully whose marriage was collapsing and whose career was in ruins. I thought about all the family dinners where Jessica's professional achievements had been celebrated while my freelance work was dismissed as unstable. All the times her relationship with David had been praised as an example I should follow, while my single status was treated as a personal failing. The golden child's life was falling apart, but instead of acknowledging her role in creating these problems, she was being supported in blaming everyone else. An hour later, I heard a car door slam again. Jessica was back this time, storming up the stairs to my apartment. She pounded on my door with unusual aggression. "Macy, open up. I need to talk to you." I considered pretending I wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door to find Jessica looking haggard and desperate, her perfect makeup smeared from crying. "Did you hear what happened downstairs?" she demanded, pushing past me into my small living room. "I heard some of it," I admitted. "It sounds like you're going through a difficult time." Jessica laughed bitterly. "A difficult time. That's one way to put it. My husband wants a divorce. My job is in jeopardy, and I'm probably going to lose my house." I wasn't sure how to respond. This was the first time Jessica had ever come to me, seeking support or sympathy, and given our family's dynamics, I suspected there was an ulterior motive. "I'm sorry to hear about your marriage troubles," I said carefully. "Are you, though?" Jessica turned to face me, her eyes red with tears and anger. "Are you really sorry, or are you secretly glad that my perfect life is falling apart?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. "Jessica, I don't want you to suffer. I may not like how our family works, but I don't wish bad things on you." "Right," she said sarcastically. "The martyred little sister who's always been so understanding and forgiving. Don't pretend you haven't been waiting for this moment." "What moment?" "The moment when golden child Jessica finally fails at something. When the family favorite finally loses her shine and you get to feel superior for once." I stared at her, recognizing that even in her moment of vulnerability, Jessica was making this conversation about how my reactions affected her rather than taking responsibility for her own choices. "Jessica, I'm not feeling superior. I'm confused about why you're here talking to me about this." "Because you're the only one who won't judge me," she said, collapsing onto my couch. "Mom and Dad are already strategizing about how to fix everything, but they don't understand how bad this really is." "How bad is it?" Jessica looked at me for a long moment as if deciding whether to trust me with the truth. "The recordings Marcus made aren't just about questioning his qualifications. I said some really awful things about him, about other minority co-workers, about diversity policies in general. If those recordings go public, I won't just lose my job. I'll be unemployable in my entire industry." "Jessica, what exactly did you say?" "Things I can't take back," she whispered. "Things that make me sound like a terrible person." "Are you a terrible person?" She looked up at me sharply. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one. You're worried about sounding like a terrible person on those recordings. Are you concerned about the appearance, or are you concerned about the reality?" Jessica was quiet for a moment, then her expression hardened. "You know what, forget it. I thought I could talk to you without getting a lecture about morality and personal growth." "I'm not lecturing you. I'm asking if you feel bad about what you did, or if you just feel bad about getting caught." "Of course I feel bad," she snapped. "Do you think I wanted my career to implode?" "That's not the same thing, Jessica. Do you feel bad about hurting Marcus? Do you feel bad about creating a hostile work environment for him?" "Marcus is fine," she said dismissively. "He's not some fragile victim who needs protection. He's ambitious and calculating just like everyone else in corporate America." "So you don't think your behavior was wrong, you just think the consequences are unfair." Jessica stood up abruptly. "You know what this is? Exactly why I don't talk to you about real things. You always want to turn everything into some deep psychological analysis. I'm not analyzing you, Jessica. I'm trying to understand how you see this situation. I see it as my life falling apart while my family looks for someone to blame instead of someone to support. Mom and Dad seem very supportive. They're talking about hiring lawyers and using connections to help you. That's not support, that's damage control. They're worried about how this affects their reputation, not about how I'm feeling." I felt a flash of anger at her complaint. "You're upset that Mom and Dad are more concerned about appearances than your emotional well-being." "Yes, exactly." "Jessica, that's how they've treated me my entire life. You're getting a taste of what it feels like to be the family member whose problems are seen as inconveniences rather than tragedies." Her face flushed with anger. This is not the same thing at all. You've never had anything really bad happen to you. Your problems are self-created and fixable. My problems are self-created? Yes, your lack of career success, your relationship issues, your financial struggles. Those are all choices you made. And your harassment complaint and divorce aren't choices you made. Jessica stared at me with genuine hatred. You know what, Macy, I always knew you resented me, but I thought you'd at least pretend to care when I was going through a crisis. I do care, Jessica, but caring doesn't mean agreeing with your version of events or telling you what you want to hear. What I want to hear is that you understand how devastating this is for me. What I want is acknowledgement that I'm dealing with things you've never had to face. You mean like being pushed downstairs by a family member and then mocked while you lay injured at the bottom? Jessica's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like guilt, but only for a moment. That was an accident and you know it. Stop being so dramatic about everything. It wasn't an accident, Jessica. You were angry and you pushed me. Own it. Fine, she said coldly. I pushed you. And you know why? Because you're exhausting. You walk around with this victim mentality, always acting like the family treats you so poorly, always making everything about your feelings. So, I deserve to be pushed down the stairs? You deserve to be told to shut up and stop whining. The push was just emphasis. I stared at her, shocked by her casual admission and complete lack of remorse. And that's why your life is falling apart, Jessica, because you think people deserve whatever bad treatment you give them and you never take responsibility for the damage you cause. My life is falling apart because people are jealous of my success and looking for ways to tear me down. Your life is falling apart because you're a bully who finally picked on someone who fought back. Jessica moved toward the door, her face twisted with rage. I came here thinking you might have some compassion for what I'm going through, but you're just as self-righteous and judgmental as always. I hope things work out for you, Jessica, but not because you deserve special treatment. Because maybe if you face some real consequences for your behavior, you'll finally learn to treat people better. She slammed the door so hard that my windows rattled. I sat alone in my apartment processing the conversation and what it revealed about my sister's true character. The golden child facade had cracked completely, revealing someone who blamed others for problems she created, showed no empathy for people she hurt, and expected endless support without offering accountability. But what disturbed me most was realizing that Jessica's behavior toward Marcus mirrored her behavior toward me. She had spent years bullying and undermining me while expecting the family to support her actions and blame me for my reactions. The only difference was that Marcus had recordings and workplace protections, while I had grown up accepting abuse as normal family dynamics. For the first time, I understood that Jessica's treatment of me wasn't sibling rivalry or personality conflict. It was the behavior of someone who genuinely believed she was superior to others and entitled to treat them badly without consequences. The golden child wasn't just failing at work and marriage. She was revealing herself to be exactly the kind of person who would push her sister downstairs and then mock her pain. And my parents had spent 28 years enabling and protecting this behavior while teaching me to accept it as love. I should have expected what happened next, but somehow I was still surprised by how quickly my family closed ranks against me. Less than 24 hours after my confrontation with Jessica, both of my parents called within an hour of each other. Dad called first while I was trying to eat breakfast one-handed. "Macy, your sister is very upset about your conversation yesterday. She says you were cruel and unsympathetic about her situation." "Hi, Dad. Yes, I'm doing fine with my broken wrist. Thanks for asking." "Don't be smart with me, young lady. Jessica is going through the worst crisis of her life, and instead of supporting her, you decided to attack her character." I set down my coffee mug carefully, already feeling my blood pressure rising. "I didn't attack her character, Dad. I asked her to take responsibility for her actions." "Her actions. She's the victim here, Macy. Her husband is abandoning her, and some ambitious coworker is trying to destroy her career with false accusations. The accusations aren't false, Dad. Jessica admitted to me that she said racist things about her colleague. She's facing consequences for workplace harassment. That's not how Jessica described it to us. She said you twisted her words and made her feel worse about an already difficult situation. Of course, Jessica had reframed our conversation to make herself the victim of my cruelty rather than someone who had admitted to discriminatory behavior at work. Dad, Jessica came to my apartment to talk. During that conversation, she acknowledged that she said inappropriate things about Marcus and other minority coworkers. She's not denying the behavior, just the consequences. Well, that's not what she told us. She said you interrogated her about her personal choices instead of offering sisterly support. So, Jessica gets to rewrite history and you'll believe her version even when it contradicts what actually happened. I believe the daughter who's never caused problems for this family over the daughter who specializes in creating drama. The casual dismissal of my perspective in favor of Jessica's narrative felt like another punch to the gut. Even when Jessica was clearly in the wrong, even when she was facing consequences for genuinely harmful behavior, I was still the problem child whose viewpoint couldn't be trusted. Dad, I've been part of this family for 28 years. When have I ever created drama? Every time you complain about feeling left out, every time you question our decisions, every time you make family gatherings uncomfortable with your attitude. You mean every time I've asked for equal treatment or expressed hurt about being dismissed? I mean every time you've refused to accept your role in this family and tried to stir up trouble instead. My role in this family. There it was, the explicit acknowledgement that I had a designated role, and that role was apparently to accept mistreatment without complaint. What exactly is my role supposed to be, Dad? To be supportive of your sister, respectful of your parents, and grateful for everything we've provided for you. And Jessica's role? To make us proud, which she's done consistently until this unfortunate situation. So Jessica's role is to succeed, while my role is to support her success, even when that success comes at the expense of treating people badly. Your role is to be a loving sister instead of a jealous critic. I'm not jealous of Jessica's behavior, Dad. I'm horrified by it. And that attitude is exactly why Jessica didn't feel comfortable coming to you for support. She needed compassion, not judgment. I realized this conversation was going nowhere. In Dad's worldview, Jessica's need for unconditional support outweighed any consideration of her actions or their impact on others. Dad, when I was pushed down the stairs and broke my wrist, did Jessica offer me compassion or judgment? That was an accident, and you know it. Stop bringing up ancient history when your sister is dealing with real problems. Ancient history. My assault and injury from 2 weeks ago was ancient history, while Jessica's self-created workplace crisis demanded immediate family unity and support. If Jessica's problems are real and mine are ancient history, I think I understand where I stand in this family's hierarchy. There's no hierarchy, Macy. There are just different personality types and different approaches to handling challenges. Right. Jessica's approach involves harassing coworkers and pushing family members downstairs, while my approach involves ancient history, like having feelings about being injured. You're being deliberately obtuse. Jessica made some poor choices at work, but that doesn't make her a bad person. Meanwhile, you're holding grudges about family dynamics and using Jessica's crisis as an opportunity to relitigate old grievances. I hung up on him. For the first time in my life, I actually hung up on my father rather than continuing to absorb his gaslighting and manipulation. 30 minutes later, Mom called. Her approach was different but equally infuriating. Macy, honey, I'm concerned about your emotional state lately. Dad told me about your conversation with him, and Jessica is very hurt by your lack of support during her difficult time. Hi, Mom. Let me guess. You're calling to tell me what a terrible sister I am for not supporting Jessica's racist harassment of her coworker. I'm calling because I'm worried about you. You seem angry and resentful, and that's not healthy for you or for our family relationships. I am angry, Mom. I'm angry that Jessica faces no consequences for pushing me down the stairs. Angry that she's being coddled while she deals with consequences for workplace harassment, and angry that I'm being blamed for not enabling her bad behavior. Sweetie, you're making Jessica's work situation sound much worse than it actually is. She may have been a little too direct with some colleagues, but she's not a racist or a harasser. Mom, she admitted to me that she made inappropriate comments about diversity hires and questioned Marcus's qualifications because of his race. Well, workplace politics can be complicated. Sometimes people say things that get taken out of context. She recorded saying discriminatory things, Mom. That's not context, that's evidence. Macy, I think you're choosing to interpret Jessica's situation in the worst possible light because you're still upset about the stairs incident. The stairs incident. Even Mom couldn't bring herself to call it what it was, an assault that resulted in my broken wrist. Mom, these are two separate issues. Jessica's workplace harassment is about her choice to discriminate against a colleague. Her assault on me is about her choice to physically attack a family member. Both reveal patterns of behavior where Jessica hurts others and faces no accountability. Attack is a very strong word, honey. Jessica didn't attack you. You two had a disagreement that got physical for a moment. I had a disagreement. Jessica had violence. You're being overdramatic again, sweetheart. This is exactly what I'm worried about. Your tendency to catastrophize normal family conflicts. Normal family conflicts. According to Mom, being pushed downstairs was a normal conflict, while asking Jessica to take responsibility for her actions was overdramatic. Mom, do you think it's normal for one family member to send another family member to the hospital? I think siblings sometimes have heated moments and accidents happen during emotional conversations. Do you think it's normal for a family to laugh at someone's injury instead of helping them? I think we didn't realize how seriously hurt you were, and we reacted with nervous laughter rather than genuine amusement. Nervous laughter. She was rewriting history again, turning their cruel mockery of my pain into an understandable stress response. Do you think it's normal for parents to hide scholarship opportunities from one child while providing every advantage to another child? There was a long pause. I don't know what you're talking about, Macy. I found the folder in my old room, Mom, the scholarship letters you and Dad hid from me, the emails with my guidance counselor where you refused to let me know about full-ride opportunities to prestigious art schools. Another pause longer this time. Those were complicated decisions based on what we thought was best for you at the time. You thought it was best for me to not know about full scholarships that could have changed my entire life trajectory. We thought you were too immature to make such big decisions, and we were concerned about you moving far from home so young. But Jessica was mature enough to make big decisions, and you weren't concerned about her moving far from home. Jessica's situation was different. Jessica was more stable, more practical. We knew she could handle the challenges of competitive academic environments. And I couldn't handle challenges because you've always been more sensitive, more emotional. We were trying to protect you from environments that might be overwhelming. So you protected me by hiding opportunities and keeping me dependent and local while you prepared Jessica for success by giving her every advantage and encouraging her independence. We tried to make decisions that played to each of your strengths. My strengths being emotional instability and Jessica's being everything else. Macy, you're twisting my words. We've always wanted what's best for both of our daughters. What's best for Jessica is career advancement, financial support, and family protection from consequences. What's best for me is limitation dependence and acceptance of whatever treatment I receive. That's not true, sweetheart. We love you both equally. But you treat us completely differently. Because you are different people with different needs and different capabilities. And Jessica's capabilities include harassing coworkers and assaulting family members. Macy, I'm ending this conversation. You're clearly in a state of mind where you can't discuss family issues rationally. I'm in a state of mind where I can see family issues clearly for the first time in my life. When you're ready to have a mature conversation about supporting your sister through her crisis and moving forward as a family, you can call us back." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my apartment processing both conversations and the consistent themes in my parents' messaging. Jessica was the victim who deserved support despite creating her own problems through harmful behavior. I was the problem who needed to provide that support despite being the actual victim of Jessica's violence. My parents weren't just taking Jessica's side in these specific conflicts, they were reinforcing the fundamental family dynamic where Jessica's needs mattered more than my well-being, where Jessica's version of events was automatically believed while mine was automatically dismissed. An hour later, my phone started ringing with calls from extended family members. First my aunt, then my uncle, then my cousin, all with variations of the same message I needed to stop being selfish and support Jessica during her time of need. "Your parents are really worried about you," my Aunt Linda said. "They think you might need professional help to deal with your anger and resentment toward Jessica. Did they mention that Jessica pushed me down the stairs and broke my wrist 2 weeks ago? They said you had some kind of accident during a family disagreement, but Macy, that's not what this is about. Jessica is facing a divorce and potential job loss. She needs her family's support right now." Did they mention that Jessica is facing job loss because she was harassing a coworker based on his race? They said there was some kind of workplace misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion by overly sensitive people. Overly sensitive people. The same language Mom used to describe my reactions to family mistreatment was now being applied to Jessica's harassment victim. My uncle called with a slightly different approach. "Macy, I don't know what's going on with you and your sister, but your parents are good people who raised 2 daughters the best they could. It's time to let go of childhood grievances and be there for family when they need you. Uncle Frank, this isn't about childhood grievances. This is about Jessica facing consequences for workplace discrimination and domestic violence, while I'm being pressured to pretend those things didn't happen." Workplace discrimination, domestic violence. Macy, those are very serious accusations that don't match the situation your parents described. What situation did they describe? Office politics getting out of hand and a sibling disagreement that resulted in a minor accident. Office politics and minor accidents. My parents were systematically reframing Jessica's harmful behavior as innocent misunderstandings while recruiting family members to pressure me into compliance. By the end of the day, 6 different relatives had called to express concern about my attitude and mental state. None of them had been told the truth about Jessica's behavior. All of them had been given sanitized versions that made me look like the unreasonable family member who was attacking Jessica during her time of need. The coordinated nature of the calls made it clear that my parents had reached out to our entire extended family network with a carefully crafted narrative designed to isolate me and build support for Jessica. In their version of events, Jessica was an innocent victim of workplace politics and marital problems who deserved family support. I was an unstable, resentful sister who was using Jessica's crisis as an opportunity to air imaginary grievances about childhood favoritism. I realized that challenging the family's golden child had triggered a full defensive mobilization designed to protect the existing power structure. Jessica could harass coworkers and assault family members, but I couldn't question her behavior without being labeled as mentally unstable. The message was clear: get back in line, resume my role as supportive family scapegoat, and stop threatening the system that had protected Jessica's bad behavior for decades. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't willing to accept that message. It was time to document everything and prepare for war. After spending an entire day fielding phone calls from relatives who had been fed distorted versions of recent events, I realized that my family's gaslighting campaign was more coordinated and malicious than I had ever imagined. They weren't just dismissing my perspective. They were actively working to undermine my credibility and isolate me from potential support. That evening, I sat down with a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember about the past 2 weeks, starting with Christmas morning. I documented times, dates, exact quotes when I could remember them, and the names of everyone present during key conversations. The process was more painful than I had expected. Seeing the pattern of abuse laid out chronologically made it impossible to dismiss or minimize what had happened, but it also gave me a sense of clarity and purpose I had never felt before. I remembered Patricia's advice about reality testing and boundary setting. If I was going to challenge my family's narrative about me being unstable and dramatic, I needed evidence to support my version of events. The next morning, I went to the electronics store and bought a small digital recorder that I could carry discreetly. If my family continued their pattern of gaslighting and manipulation, I wanted proof of what was actually being said versus what they later claimed they had said. I also started saving every text message, email, and voicemail from family members instead of deleting them immediately. For years, I had been in the habit of getting rid of hurtful communications quickly to avoid dwelling on them. Now I realized that pattern had prevented me from seeing the scope and consistency of their emotional abuse. My phone was already full of evidence from the past week alone. Text messages from Jessica calling me selfish and unsupportive. Voicemails from Mom expressing concern about my mental health, emails from Dad about my attitude problems and need for perspective. Reading them all together, I could see how my family used mental health concerns as a weapon against me. Anytime I challenged their behavior or expressed hurt about their treatment, they responded by questioning my psychological stability rather than addressing the content of my complaints. I called Patricia and scheduled an emergency session to discuss what was happening. This is a very common response when the family scapegoat starts setting boundaries, she explained after I described the coordinated phone campaign. The system is designed to maintain itself, so when you stop playing your assigned role, everyone else mobilizes to force you back into compliance. But they're telling people I'm having a mental breakdown. My own relatives are calling to suggest I need psychiatric help. That's also typical. Dysfunctional families often pathologize the member who points out problems rather than addressing the dysfunction itself. It's easier to label you as crazy than to admit they've been mistreating you. Patricia pulled out another book and showed me a chapter about whisper campaigns in narcissistic family systems. When the scapegoat begins to resist, the family often launches a preemptive narrative assault designed to discredit them before they can expose the family's dysfunction. So they're not just reacting to my recent behavior, they're trying to prevent me from telling people what actually happened. Exactly. They need to maintain their public image as a loving, normal family. If you start talking about Jessica's assault, the hidden scholarship opportunities, or the years of emotional abuse, that image becomes threatened. But what if they're right? What if I am having some kind of psychological breakdown and seeing things that aren't really there? Patricia smiled gently. Macy, you're doing the exact opposite of having a breakdown. You're finally seeing clearly after years of having your perception distorted by people who benefited from your confusion. She explained that my newfound ability to recognize and name abusive behavior was actually a sign of psychological health, not illness. The fact that you're questioning your own perceptions shows how thoroughly you've been conditioned to doubt yourself, but the evidence you've presented is consistent and credible. So what do I do now? You continue documenting everything and you prepare for the possibility that your family will escalate their campaign to pressure you into compliance. Patricia was right about the escalation. That afternoon, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced with my Aunt Linda and my cousin Sarah. The intervention squad had arrived. I quickly activated the voice recorder on my phone and slipped it into my pocket before answering the door. "Hi, sweetie," Mom said with exaggerated warmth. "We thought we'd stop by for a little chat. All three of you just happened to be in the neighborhood. We're concerned about you," Aunt Linda said, pushing past me into my living room. "Your family loves you, but they're worried about your recent behavior." I gestured for them to sit down, curious to see how this intervention would unfold. "What behavior concerns you?" "Your anger toward Jessica for starters," Sarah said. "She's going through the worst time of her life, and instead of supporting her, you're attacking her character. Can you be specific about how I've attacked her character? You've accused her of being racist, Mom said. You've suggested she deliberately hurt you on Christmas. You've refused to offer comfort or assistance during her crisis. Did you tell them what Jessica actually said about her coworker, or what she actually did to me on Christmas morning? We told them about the workplace misunderstanding and the accident on the stairs, Mom replied carefully. The workplace misunderstanding where Jessica admitted to making racist comments about Marcus and other minority colleagues. The three women exchanged glances. Jessica may have been insensitive in her communication style, Aunt Linda said diplomatically, but that doesn't make her a racist. And the accident where Jessica deliberately pushed me with both hands and sent me tumbling down 15 stairs. Macy, you're exaggerating again, Mom said with a sigh. There was a moment of physical contact during an argument, but calling it deliberate violence is dramatic and unfair. Were you there when it happened? I saw the aftermath, and I know Jessica would never intentionally hurt you. But you didn't see the actual push. I didn't need to see it to know Jessica's character. So you're taking Jessica's word over mine about what happened to me. We're taking the word of the daughter who's never shown violent tendencies over the daughter who's clearly struggling with anger and resentment issues, Sarah said bluntly. I felt my temper flare but managed to keep my voice level. What anger and resentment issues? Your complaints about childhood favoritism, your jealousy of Jessica's success, your refusal to accept responsibility for your own choices. Mom listed. These are patterns that have been building for years. Can you give me specific examples of times I've refused to accept responsibility for my choices? Your career struggles, your relationship problems, your financial difficulties, Aunt Linda said. Instead of addressing these issues constructively, you blame family dynamics. What career struggles? I'm a successful freelance graphic designer with steady clients and good income. Freelancing isn't a real career, honey, Sarah said gently. It's gig work that leaves you financially insecure and professionally isolated. And my relationship problems? You've never maintained a long-term relationship because you have trust issues and difficulty with emotional intimacy, Mom explained. Those are things you could work on with therapy instead of blaming your upbringing. What financial difficulties? You're 28 years old and living in a garage apartment, Macy. That's not exactly financial success. I realized they had come prepared with a comprehensive list of my supposed failures and deficiencies. Every aspect of my life was being reframed as evidence of personal inadequacy rather than the result of deliberate family sabotage. I'm living in the garage apartment temporarily while I recover from my broken wrist. My regular apartment doesn't have the accessibility features I need right now. See, there you go again, Mom said with frustration. Everything comes back to that wrist injury. You're using one unfortunate incident to justify ongoing anger toward your entire family. One unfortunate incident where my sister assaulted me and broke my bone. One accident during a family disagreement that you're blowing completely out of proportion, Aunt Linda corrected. I looked at the three women sitting in my living room, all united in their conviction that I was the problem that needed to be fixed. They had arrived with predetermined conclusions about my character, my choices, and my motivations that no amount of evidence would change. What would you like me to do differently? I asked. Apologize to Jessica for your lack of support during her crisis, Mom said immediately. Acknowledge that your anger is misplaced and commit to working on your emotional issues. And if I don't? The three women exchanged looks again. Macy, this family has been very patient with your behavior over the years, Sarah said carefully. But patience has limits. What does that mean? It means that if you continue down this path of blame and resentment, you may find yourself increasingly isolated from family relationships, Aunt Linda explained. You're threatening to cut me off if I don't apologize for being assaulted. We're explaining the natural consequences of choosing anger over forgiveness and family harmony, Mom said. Family harmony that requires me to pretend Jessica didn't break my wrist. family harmony that requires you to let go of grudges and focus on healing relationships instead of assigning blame. I realized this intervention was actually an ultimatum disguised as a concern visit. Submit to the family narrative about my deficiencies and Jessica's innocence, or face complete social isolation from the only support system I had ever known. I need some time to think about everything you've said. Of course, sweetheart, Mom said, standing up. Take all the time you need, but remember that Jessica is dealing with real problems right now and she needs her family's love and support. After they left, I listened to the recording of our conversation. Hearing their coordinated message strategy played back confirmed that this wasn't spontaneous concern from worried relatives. This was a calculated campaign designed to break down my resistance and force me back into compliance with family dysfunction. I spent the rest of the evening transcribing the recording and adding it to my growing documentation file. For the first time in my life, I had proof of how my family operated when they thought I was becoming a problem that needed to be managed. The evidence was disturbing but also empowering. I wasn't imagining their gaslighting tactics or misremembering their attempts to undermine my reality. I had recordings, text messages, and written documentation that proved everything I was experiencing. Patricia had been right about preparation being necessary. My family was escalating their pressure campaign, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. But I was no longer the confused, self-doubting scapegoat they had spent 28 years conditioning me to be. I was someone with evidence, documentation, and finally a plan. Over the next week, the phone calls from relatives intensified into what felt like a full-scale psychological warfare campaign. It started with my grandmother calling from Florida, her voice trembling with concern. "Macy, darling, your mother is beside herself with worry about you. She says you've been making terrible accusations about Jessica and refusing to help during this difficult time." I had always been close to Grandma Ruth, so her disappointment cut deeper than the criticism from other family members. "Grandma, did Mom tell you what Jessica did to me on Christmas morning? She said you had some kind of accident during a family disagreement, but sweetheart, holding grudges isn't good for your soul. Jessica is suffering right now and family needs to stick together." What exactly did Mom tell you about Jessica's situation at work? That some ambitious coworker is trying to sabotage her career with false accusations. It's terrible what people will do when they're jealous of others' success. False accusations. Even my grandmother, who lived 1,000 miles away, had been fed the sanitized version where Jessica was an innocent victim rather than someone facing consequences for discriminatory harassment. Grandma Jessica admitted to me that she made racist comments about her colleague. She's not being falsely accused. She's facing accountability for her own actions. There was a long pause. "Macy, honey, that doesn't sound like the Jessica I know. She's always been such a sweet, thoughtful girl." People can be sweet to family while being cruel to others. "I think you might be misunderstanding what Jessica told you. Sometimes when people are stressed, they say things that come out wrong but don't reflect their true character." I realized that even with direct information about Jessica's confession, my grandmother was choosing to interpret it in a way that preserved Jessica's image as the sweet, perfect granddaughter. "Grandma, what would it take for you to believe that Jessica did something wrong?" "Oh, sweetheart, this isn't about right and wrong. This is about forgiveness and family loyalty. Even if Jessica made some mistakes, the loving thing to do is support her through the consequences." "And what about support for me after she broke my wrist?" "Accidents happen, darling. The important thing is not letting unfortunate incidents damage family relationships permanently." After hanging up with Grandma Ruth, I felt emotionally drained. If I couldn't get through to the family member who supposedly loved me unconditionally, how could I expect anyone else to see the truth? But the calls kept coming. My cousin Mark called from college to lecture me about family responsibility. "Dude, I don't know what's going on with you, but Jessica's always been cool to me. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there because you're jealous of her success." My Aunt Carol called to share her own experience with workplace politics. Honey, I've been in corporate environments for 20 years, and these harassment allegations are often just misunderstandings that get blown out of proportion by overly sensitive HR departments. My Uncle Tom called with a more direct approach. Macy, your parents have given you everything, and Jessica has always been a good sister to you. This attitude you've developed is ungrateful and destructive. You need to get your priorities straight. Each conversation followed the same pattern: dismiss Jessica's actual behavior, minimize my injury, and reframe my reactions as evidence of character flaws that needed correction. What disturbed me most was how easily my extended family accepted my parents' narrative without questioning it or asking for my perspective. They were willing to believe I had suddenly developed mental health issues rather than consider that their information might be incomplete or biased. The most painful call came from my cousin Emma, who I had always considered a close friend and ally. Macy, I'm really worried about you. Aunt Linda says you're accusing Jessica of assault and making wild claims about your childhood. That doesn't sound like you at all. Emma, what if those accusations are true? What if I'm finally telling the truth about things that actually happened? But why would you wait until now to bring up childhood issues? And why, during Jessica's crisis, the timing makes it look like you're trying to hurt her when she's already down? Maybe I'm bringing it up now because I finally have language to describe what happened and validation that it wasn't normal. Or maybe you're having some kind of breakdown and seeing connections that aren't really there. Have you considered talking to someone professional about these feelings? Everyone wanted me to seek professional help, but not because they thought I needed support for dealing with trauma. They wanted me medicated or therapized back into compliance with family dysfunction. I am talking to someone professional, Emma, and she says my family's behavior matches patterns of systematic emotional abuse. Macy, that's a really serious accusation. Are you sure this therapist isn't putting ideas in your head? Sometimes these counselors see abuse where there's just normal family dysfunction. Normal family dysfunction. Even Emma was willing to acknowledge that our family was dysfunctional, but only in ways that didn't require anyone to take responsibility for harmful behavior. Emma, if I showed you documentation of years of favoritism, hidden opportunities, and deliberate sabotage of my development, would that change your mind? Documentation, Macy. You're starting to sound paranoid. Families aren't conspiracies with documentation and evidence. They're just people trying to do their best with imperfect information. Paranoid. Another label designed to discredit my perceptions and discourage me from seeking validation for my experiences. The breaking point came when my Uncle Dave called with information that made my blood run cold. Macy, your parents are really concerned about your mental state. They're talking about having you evaluated for psychiatric intervention if this behavior continues. Psychiatric intervention. They think you might be having some kind of psychotic break where you're creating elaborate fantasies about family persecution. They're worried you could become dangerous to yourself or others. I felt my chest tighten with panic. My parents weren't just trying to isolate me socially. They were laying groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent. Uncle Dave, did they show you any evidence that I'm dangerous or psychotic? They showed me some text messages you sent that seemed pretty angry and accusatory, and they played me a voicemail where you were making threats. What threats? Something about not letting Jessica get away with what she did and making sure everyone knew the truth about the family. I remembered that voicemail. I had been frustrated after a particularly gaslighting conversation with Mom and had left a message saying I wouldn't let them continue lying about what happened and that I would make sure people understood the truth about Jessica's behavior. But in their retelling, my promise to tell the truth had become threats of violence or revenge. Uncle Dave, those weren't threats of violence. I was saying I would tell people what actually happened instead of accepting the lies they're spreading about me. That's not how your parents interpreted it, Macy. They're genuinely afraid of what you might do. They're afraid I might tell people the truth about how they've treated me. Or they're afraid you're losing touch with reality and might hurt yourself or someone else. I realized that my family's whisper campaign had evolved into something much more dangerous. They weren't just trying to discredit my perspective. They were building a case for having me involuntarily committed to psychiatric care. In their narrative, I was an unstable individual who had developed elaborate delusions about family persecution and was making threatening statements about revenge. They had twisted my legitimate complaints into evidence of mental illness and my promises to tell the truth into threats of violence. "Uncle Dave, have you ever seen me display violent or dangerous behavior?" "Well, no, but mental illness can develop suddenly in people your age, and your parents know you better than anyone. Do they know the version of me they've spent 28 years creating through systematic emotional abuse?" "Macy, listen to yourself. You're talking about systematic abuse and conspiracy theories. That's not normal thinking. What's not normal is a family that hides scholarship opportunities from one child while providing every advantage to another. What's not normal is parents who laugh when one daughter injures another. What's not normal is calling someone's injury an accident when multiple people witnessed it was deliberate. But you don't have proof of any of that, do you? You just have your memories and interpretations of events. I have documentation, Uncle Dave. I have the hidden scholarship letters, the emails where my parents refused to let me know about opportunities, the recordings of recent conversations where they admit their favoritism. Recordings Macy secretly recording family conversations is not normal behavior. That's exactly the kind of thing that makes people worried about your mental state. I realized that any evidence I gathered would be reframed as proof of my instability rather than validation of my claims. In my family's version of reality, documenting abuse was more problematic than committing abuse. So if I have no evidence, I'm delusional. If I gather evidence, I'm paranoid. There's no way for me to prove what happened without being labeled as mentally ill. There's no way to prove it because it probably didn't happen the way you remember it. Memory is unreliable, especially when you're looking for reasons to blame others for your problems. My problems? Your career struggles, your relationship issues, your financial situation. It's easier to blame family dynamics than to take responsibility for your own choices. Even Uncle Dave had been fed the comprehensive list of my supposed failures and character defects. My family had prepared talking points for every relative who might have contact with me. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment feeling completely isolated and terrified. My extended family had been systematically turned against me through a campaign of lies and manipulation designed to portray me as mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. If my parents followed through on their threat of psychiatric intervention, I could lose my independence, my career, and my credibility permanently. Who would believe the word of someone who had been institutionalized over the word of a respectable, middle-class family? I called Patricia immediately and explained what Uncle Dave had told me. "This is unfortunately common when scapegoats start challenging family narratives," she said. "The threat of psychiatric intervention is used to terrorize them back into compliance. But what if they actually do it? What if they convince someone I'm mentally ill? They would need medical evidence of actual mental illness and documentation of dangerous behavior. Challenging family dysfunction doesn't qualify despite what they're telling your relatives." Patricia explained that involuntary commitment required specific legal criteria that my family couldn't manufacture based on my recent behavior alone. But she also warned that they could continue escalating their harassment and isolation campaign. The fact that they're coordinating this extensively shows how threatened they are by your newfound clarity. They need to silence you before you expose their dysfunction to others. So what do? You continue documenting everything, and you prepare for the possibility that you may need to cut contact completely for your own safety and well-being. As I hung up with Patricia, I realized that my family's reaction to my attempts at accountability had revealed the true scope of their dysfunction. They weren't just dismissing my complaints or minimizing Jessica's behavior. They were actively working to destroy my credibility, isolate me from support systems, and potentially have me institutionalized to prevent me from exposing their abuse. The loving family I had spent 28 years trying to please didn't actually exist. What existed was a protective system designed to maintain Jessica's position and eliminate any threats to that hierarchy. And I had just become the biggest threat they had ever faced. After Uncle Dave's revelation about my parents considering psychiatric intervention, I knew I needed legal advice. Patricia had recommended an attorney who specialized in family law and harassment cases, and I called her office first thing Monday morning. Catherine Walsh's law office was located in a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive-looking furniture. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Dr. Hendricks filled me in on the basics of your situation," she said after I settled into the chair across from her desk. She mentioned family harassment escalating to threats of forced psychiatric evaluation. I pulled out my phone and the folder of documents I had discovered. It started with my sister pushing me downstairs and breaking my wrist. When I asked for accountability, my family began a campaign to discredit me and isolate me from extended family support. Catherine reviewed the photos of my injury, listened to several of the recorded conversations, and examined the documentation of hidden scholarship opportunities with growing interest. "Let me make sure I understand the timeline correctly," she said, taking notes. "Your sister physically assaulted you, causing significant injury. When you sought acknowledgement and accountability, your family responded by gaslighting you about the incident and launching a systematic campaign to portray you as mentally unstable." "That's exactly right. And now they're telling relatives they're considering psychiatric intervention because they think I'm dangerous or delusional." Catherine set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Macy, what your family is doing constitutes harassment, defamation, and potentially criminal conspiracy. The coordinated nature of their campaign to damage your reputation and threaten your freedom is legally actionable." Hearing an attorney validate my experience with such certainty was both relieving and terrifying. But they're my family. Can I really take legal action against my own parents and sister? Family relationships don't exempt people from laws against harassment, assault, and defamation. Your sister's physical attack was criminal assault. Your family's response has been systematic psychological abuse designed to coerce you into silence. Catherine explained that I had several legal options ranging from restraining orders to criminal charges to civil lawsuits for damages. "The recordings you've made are particularly valuable because they document the gaslighting and manipulation in real time. Most victims of family abuse don't have this kind of evidence." She played back one of the conversations where Mom explicitly stated that Jessica's needs were more important than my injury, then another where Dad dismissed my assault as ancient history while demanding I support Jessica's workplace crisis. These recordings show a clear pattern of prioritizing the perpetrator over the victim and using emotional manipulation to maintain that dynamic. A judge would find this deeply concerning. But what about their claims that I'm mentally unstable? They're telling people I'm making up elaborate persecution fantasies. Catherine laughed grimly. "Macy, your documentation is meticulous. Your timeline is consistent, and your behavior throughout this ordeal has been remarkably rational. You've sought professional help, gathered evidence systematically, and tried to address issues through direct communication before considering legal action." She pulled out a legal pad and began outlining potential strategies. "If they follow through on threats of psychiatric intervention, we can seek an emergency restraining order preventing them from making false reports about your mental health. We can also pursue defamation claims for the lies they're spreading to your extended family." "What about the assault itself?" "The statute of limitations for criminal charges hasn't expired, and you have medical documentation of the injury. However, prosecuting family members for assault can be complicated because juries sometimes expect victims to get over domestic violence." Catherine recommended starting with a comprehensive cease and desist letter that would put my family on legal notice that their harassment campaign needed to stop immediately. "We'll detail every instance of defamation, harassment, and intimidation, along with the evidence supporting your claims. This serves two purposes. It gives them an opportunity to stop their behavior voluntarily, and it creates legal documentation if we need to pursue criminal or civil action later. What kind of response should I expect? Based on what you've described, they'll probably escalate initially. Narcissistic families don't respond well to external challenges to their control, but the legal consequences of continued harassment are severe enough that most people eventually back down. Catherine spent the next hour reviewing all of my documentation and recordings, occasionally stopping to take detailed notes or ask clarifying questions. Macy, I've been practicing family law for 15 years, and this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of systematic family abuse I've ever seen. Your parents didn't just favor one child over another. They deliberately sabotaged your opportunities while building a comprehensive psychological profile designed to justify their mistreatment. She showed me her notes, which outlined a pattern of behavior that met legal definitions for several forms of abuse and harassment. The hidden scholarship letters alone constitute educational sabotage that damaged your life prospects significantly. Combined with the recent assault and harassment campaign, you have grounds for substantial civil damages. I don't want money from them. I just want them to stop lying about me and leave me alone. That's understandable, but financial consequences are often the only thing that gets abusive families to change their behavior. If harassing you costs them money, they're more likely to stop. Catherine recommended a 3-phase legal strategy. Phase 1 would be the cease and desist letter demanding immediate cessation of all harassment and defamation. Phase 2 would involve restraining orders and criminal complaints if they continued their behavior. Phase 3 would be civil litigation for damages if necessary. The goal is to stop their campaign without having to go to court, but we need to be prepared for escalation if they choose to continue. She also advised me to document any further contact from family members and to avoid responding to their communications, except through legal channels. Don't give them ammunition by engaging emotionally. From now on, all communication should be factual, documented, and focused on stopping their harassment. What if they really do try to have me committed? False reporting for psychiatric intervention is a serious crime, especially when done to retaliate against someone for reporting abuse. If they attempt it, we'll pursue criminal charges and seek damages for false imprisonment. Catherine prepared a comprehensive cease and desist letter that outlined every instance of harassment, defamation, and intimidation my family had engaged in since Christmas. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all contact except through legal representatives and warned of criminal and civil consequences for continued abuse. We're sending copies to your parents, Jessica, and any extended family members who participated in the harassment campaign. This puts everyone on legal notice that their behavior is unacceptable and has consequences. Reading through the letter was surreal. Seeing my family's behavior described in legal terms made it impossible to minimize or rationalize what they had done. The coordination and systematic nature of their campaign actually works in our favor legally, Catherine explained. It shows premeditation and conspiracy rather than spontaneous emotional reactions. She also prepared a safety plan in case my family escalated their harassment in response to legal intervention. Change your locks, vary your routines, and document any attempts at contact or retaliation. If they show up at your apartment or workplace, call the police immediately. Will the police take this seriously? Domestic abuse by family members is taken very seriously by law enforcement, especially when there's documented injury and systematic harassment. The recordings and evidence you've gathered will be very compelling to investigators. As I prepared to leave Catherine's office, she handed me a business card for a private investigator who specialized in family harassment cases. If your family continues their campaign after receiving the cease and desist letter, we may need professional documentation of their activities. This investigator can gather additional evidence and provide objective documentation of any stalking or harassment. Walking out of that law office, I felt a mixture of empowerment and dread. For the first time in my life, I had legal validation that my family's treatment constituted abuse worthy of court intervention. But I also knew that taking legal action against them would permanently destroy any possibility of reconciliation or normal family relationships. The scared people-pleasing part of me wanted to back down and try to work things out through communication and compromise. But the rational, self-protective part of me recognized that my family had already destroyed our relationships through their systematic abuse and harassment campaign. The legal action wouldn't be creating conflict. It would be responding to conflict they had initiated when they chose to prioritize protecting Jessica over supporting me. As I drove home with the cease and desist letters ready to be delivered, I realized that my family had forced me into a position where legal intervention was the only way to protect myself from further abuse. They had escalated the situation beyond what therapy or family meetings could resolve. Now they would face the consequences of treating harassment and defamation as acceptable family dynamics. The cease and desist letters from Catherine's office would address the legal aspects of my family's harassment campaign, but I realized I needed to take control of the narrative they had been spreading throughout our extended family network. For too long, I had allowed them to tell their version of events unchallenged, while I remained silent about the truth. If I was going to rebuild relationships with relatives who had been fed lies about my mental state and motivations, I needed to present them with facts, evidence, and my own perspective. I spent the next week crafting a comprehensive letter that would tell my side of the story with full documentation and evidence. Unlike the legal cease and desist, this letter would be personal, detailed, and designed to help family members understand how they had been manipulated into participating in my emotional abuse. Working with Patricia to ensure the letter was factual rather than emotional, I outlined the key events and patterns that had led to our current situation. The systematic favoritism and sabotage throughout my childhood and young adulthood, supported by the documents I had found in my room. Jessica's assault on Christmas morning and the family's cruel reaction with medical documentation of my injury. My attempts to address these issues through direct communication and the gaslighting responses I received. Jessica's workplace harassment situation and my family's efforts to reframe her discriminatory behavior as innocent misunderstanding. The coordinated campaign to portray me as mentally unstable for seeking accountability and truth. Each section included specific examples, exact quotes when I had them, and supporting evidence in the form of documents, recordings, or medical records. The goal is to help your relatives understand that they've been given incomplete and biased information, Patricia explained as we reviewed the draft. Many of them probably care about you but have been manipulated into believing a false narrative. I personalized each letter based on my relationship with the recipient and their specific role in the recent harassment campaign. For relatives who had called to lecture me about family loyalty, I included examples of how my loyalty had been exploited, while Jessica's bad behavior was protected. For those who had questioned my mental health, I provided evidence of my stability and rationality, including professional validation from Dr. Martinez and Patricia. For those who had dismissed my complaints as ancient grudges, I included documentation showing that the favoritism and sabotage were ongoing and systematic, rather than isolated childhood incidents. The most difficult letter to write was the one to Grandma Ruth. She had always been a source of unconditional love in my life, and I hoped that presenting her with complete information might restore our relationship. Dear Grandma Ruth, I began, I know Mom and Dad have told you I'm having mental health problems and making wild accusations about the family. I understand why you're concerned, and I want to share the complete picture with you so you can make informed decisions about our relationship. I included copies of my childhood report cards and the hidden scholarship letters, knowing that Grandma Ruth had always been proud of my academic achievements and would be horrified to learn that my parents had sabotaged my educational opportunities. I found these documents in my childhood bedroom. As you can see, I was offered full scholarships to prestigious art schools, but Mom and Dad hid these opportunities from me while telling everyone I wasn't scholarship material. They made me believe I wasn't good enough for advanced education while actively preventing me from pursuing it. The letter to my cousin Emma was equally important because she had been one of my closest family relationships before the recent crisis. Emma, you said my accusations sounded paranoid and asked why I was bringing up childhood issues now. I'm bringing them up now because I finally have evidence that what I experienced wasn't normal sibling rivalry or unconscious favoritism. It was deliberate, systematic emotional abuse designed to keep me in a subordinate role while elevating Jessica. I included the recordings of recent conversations where my parents explicitly stated their preference for Jessica and their belief that I deserved less consideration and support. These recordings were made during conversations where I tried to address Jessica's assault and my family's response. As you can hear, they don't deny their favoritism. They justify it by claiming Jessica is naturally superior and more deserving of family resources. For relatives who lived far away and had limited direct contact with our immediate family, I provided context about the dynamics they might not have witnessed. You may not have seen the day-to-day differences in how Jessica and I were treated because they were more subtle during family gatherings and public events, but the evidence shows a consistent pattern of providing Jessica with every advantage while systematically undermining my opportunities and self-confidence. Each letter concluded with a request for fair consideration of the evidence and an explanation of why I was sharing this information. I'm not asking you to take sides or cut contact with other family members. I'm asking you to consider that the person you've known for my entire life wouldn't suddenly develop elaborate persecution fantasies without cause. The evidence speaks for itself about what actually happened and why I'm finally speaking up about it. I also included information about how they could verify my claims independently. If you have doubts about anything I've shared, please feel free to contact Dr. Martinez at Mercy General Hospital or Dr. Hendricks at the Family Wellness Center. Both professionals have reviewed this evidence and can confirm that my perceptions and reactions are consistent with someone who has experienced systematic family abuse. The final paragraph of each letter addressed the elephant in the room: why I was sending documentation to extended family about private family matters. I'm sharing this information because my parents have told many of you that I'm having mental health problems and making false accusations. They've asked you to pressure me to apologize to Jessica and accept their version of events. I have a right to defend myself against these lies with truth and evidence. Preparing 15 personalized letters with supporting documentation was exhausting work, but I felt a sense of purpose and empowerment that I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I was taking control of my own narrative instead of allowing others to define me. I arranged for the letters to be delivered via certified mail on the same day, ensuring that all recipients would receive the information simultaneously. This would prevent my parents from calling relatives to provide context or alternative explanations before they could review the evidence. Patricia reviewed the final drafts and confirmed that everything was factual and legally sound. You've created a comprehensive, well-documented presentation of the facts that will be very difficult for anyone to dismiss as mental illness or fabrication, she said. Even if some family members choose to maintain their loyalty to your parents, they won't be able to claim ignorance about what actually happened. Catherine also approved the letters from a legal perspective, confirming that they contain no defamatory statements or inappropriate sharing of confidential information. Everything you've included is either your own experience, documented fact, or information that was shared with you directly. You have every right to defend yourself against false accusations with truth. As I sealed the final envelope, I realized that sending these letters would irrevocably change my relationships with every person who received them. Some relatives might be shocked by the evidence and supportive of my position. Others might be angered by my betrayal of family loyalty and side more strongly with my parents. But regardless of their individual reactions, none of them would be able to continue believing that I was simply a mentally unstable family member making wild accusations without evidence. The truth was documented, witnessed, and about to be revealed. My family's carefully constructed narrative about my character and mental health was about to collide with objective reality. And for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't afraid of that confrontation. I waited until Tuesday morning to deliver the letters, knowing that most of my family members would be at work or busy with their daily routines. The certified mail deliveries were scheduled to arrive between Wednesday and Friday, giving everyone a chance to receive and process the information before any coordinated response could be organized. Wednesday evening, my phone remained ominously quiet. Usually, family drama generated immediate phone calls and text messages, but the silence suggested that people were actually taking time to read and consider the evidence I had provided. Thursday morning brought the first response. My cousin Emma called, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Macy, I got your letter yesterday. I've been up all night reading everything and listening to the recordings. I had no idea. I never realized how differently you and Jessica were treated." I felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. "What did you think about the evidence?" "The scholarship letters are heartbreaking. I remember you talking about wanting to go to art school, and your parents always said you couldn't afford it. To find out they hid full ride offers from you, that's not just favoritism, that's sabotage." "And the recordings?" "Hearing your mom say that Jessica's needs matter more than your broken wrist was shocking. I can't believe she actually said those words out loud." Emma paused for a long moment. "Macy, I owe you a huge apology. When Aunt Linda called to say you were having mental health problems, I believed her without question. I should have asked for your side of the story. You couldn't have known. They've been very careful to control the narrative and present themselves as the concerned family dealing with my instability. But that's exactly the problem. I've known you my entire life. You're one of the most rational, stable people I know. The idea that you would suddenly develop elaborate persecution fantasies should have seemed ridiculous to me." Emma's validation meant more to me than she could know. Having a family member actually acknowledge the evidence and apologize for believing lies about my mental health felt like a small miracle. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I'm calling Aunt Linda to tell her that her information was completely wrong. And I'm probably going to have some difficult conversations with other relatives about how we all jump to conclusions without getting the full story." Thursday afternoon brought a very different response. Uncle Dave called, his voice tight with anger. "Macy, what you've done is unconscionable. Sending private family business to 15 different relatives, making recordings without people's consent, airing dirty laundry that should be handled within the immediate family." "Uncle Dave, did you review the evidence I included?" "I don't need to review anything. Family problems should be solved within the family, not broadcast to everyone we know." Even when the family is actively lying about me and trying to isolate me from support, your parents are good people who have always done their best for both their daughters. The fact that you can't see that shows exactly the kind of mental state we've all been worried about. I realized that Uncle Dave had decided not to engage with the actual content of my letter, instead focusing on his anger about my decision to challenge the family's authority to define my reality. "Uncle Dave, did you listen to the recording where Dad admits they've always seen Jessica as the priority?" "I don't care what anyone said in the heat of the moment. Actions matter more than words, and your parents' actions have always shown love for both their children." "What about their actions in hiding scholarship opportunities from me while providing every advantage to Jessica? Those were parenting decisions made with your best interests in mind. Parents know their children better than anyone else." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Uncle Dave becoming increasingly angry about my betrayal of family loyalty, while refusing to address any of the specific evidence I had presented. Friday brought a flood of responses as more letters reached their destinations. The reactions fell into 3 clear categories: those who were shocked by the evidence and supportive of my position, those who were angry about my disloyalty, but couldn't dispute the facts, and those who simply went silent. My Aunt Carol called to express her horror at the documented sabotage. "Macy, I had no idea your parents hid those scholarship letters from you. That's not just unfair favoritism, that's deliberate sabotage of your future. I'm so sorry we didn't see what was happening. My cousin Mark sent a long text message. Holy shit, Macy. I listened to those recordings 3 times. Your mom literally said Jessica's emotional needs matter more than your broken bones. That's not normal family conflict. That's psychological abuse. I can't believe I called to lecture you about being ungrateful. But others reacted with anger and defensiveness. My Aunt Linda left a furious voicemail. Macy, what you've done is despicable. Secretly recording family conversations and sending them to everyone is manipulative and vindictive. Your parents are devastated by this betrayal, and Jessica is humiliated. You should be ashamed of yourself. The most painful response came from Grandma Ruth, who called Friday evening sounding confused and heartbroken. Macy, sweetheart, I don't understand what's happening with our family. These letters you sent with all these documents and recordings, it's like reading about strangers instead of the people I've loved for decades. Grandma, I know it's a lot to process, but these are the same people. You're just seeing aspects of their behavior that they've hidden from you. But why would your parents hide scholarship opportunities from you? Why would they treat you so differently from Jessica? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense because it's not rational or fair behavior, but the evidence shows it happened. I just can't believe that my own daughter and son-in-law would deliberately hurt one of their children while favoring the other. There must be some explanation, some context I'm missing. What context would justify hiding full-ride scholarships from your child while telling them they're not good enough for higher education? Grandma Ruth was quiet for a long time. I don't know, honey. I just don't know what to think anymore. The silence from my parents and Jessica was deafening. Usually any family conflict prompted immediate phone calls from them to manage the narrative and maintain control. But 3 days after the letters were delivered, I hadn't heard a word from any of the 3 people who had been orchestrating the harassment campaign against me. That silence told me they were scrambling to figure out how to respond to evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. On Saturday morning, I got my answer. Catherine called to inform me that her office had received a call from an attorney representing my parents and Jessica. They're threatening to sue you for invasion of privacy defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, Catherine said. It's exactly the kind of response I expected from people who are cornered and desperate. Can they actually sue me for telling the truth with evidence? They can file a lawsuit, but they won't win it. Everything you included in your letters was either your own experience, documented fact, or conversations you were party to. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and you have extensive evidence supporting everything you claimed. Catherine explained that the threat of legal action was likely a bluff designed to intimidate me into backing down and apologizing. The last thing they want is a public legal proceeding where all of this evidence would be presented in court. They're hoping you'll be scared enough to retreat and let them control the narrative again. What should I do? Nothing. Let them file their lawsuit if they want to. Discovery would be very interesting, and they know it. The fact that my family had immediately turned to legal threats rather than trying to address or explain the evidence told me everything I needed to know about their guilt and desperation. They couldn't dispute the facts, so they were trying to intimidate me into silence. But it was too late for intimidation. The truth was already out there, documented and witnessed by 15 family members who now had to decide whether to continue enabling abuse or acknowledge what had actually happened. For the first time in my life, my family's narrative about me being unstable and dramatic was being challenged by objective evidence. And judging by the variety of responses I had received, not everyone was willing to continue believing their lies. For 3 days after the letters were delivered, my parents' house remained uncharacteristically quiet. No cars coming and going, no phone calls that I could overhear from my apartment above the garage, no family conferences that usually followed any kind of crisis. The silence was unsettling because it was so unlike my family's normal pattern of immediate damage control and narrative management. Then Saturday evening, the dam broke. It started with Jessica's car pulling into the driveway so fast that her tires squealed against the pavement. She slammed the car door and stormed into the house, and within minutes I could hear raised voices from the kitchen below. "This is a disaster." Jessica's voice carried clearly through the thin floors. "My phone has been ringing nonstop with relatives asking me about workplace harassment and assault charges. Do you know how humiliating this is?" Mom's voice was higher pitched than usual, stressed and defensive. "We never thought she would actually send those recordings to everyone. Who does that?" "Who records private family conversations. Someone who's been systematically gaslit and needed evidence to prove she wasn't imagining things," I muttered to myself, unable to resist the irony. Dad's voice joined the conversation gravelly with anger. "This is exactly what we were worried about. She's completely lost perspective, and now she's trying to destroy our family's reputation out of spite." "It's not spite," Jessica snapped. "It's worse than that. She's playing victim and making herself look sympathetic while making us look like monsters. Some of these relatives actually believe her version of events." I crept closer to the heating vent that allowed sound to travel between floors, fascinated by this unguarded conversation about their reaction to being exposed. "Emma called me yesterday." Jessica continued, her voice becoming more agitated. "She actually had the nerve to ask me to explain the recordings where you said my needs mattered more than Macy's broken wrist. How do I explain that?" "You tell her that conversation was taken out of context," Mom replied immediately. "Macy recorded us during emotional moments and edited out important context that would explain our responses." "Mom, those recordings aren't edited. They're full conversations that show exactly how we talked about her injury and her feelings." "Well, then you tell Emma that private family conversations aren't meant to be shared with the world, and Macy violated our trust by recording us without permission." I was amazed by how quickly Mom pivoted to attacking my methods rather than addressing the content of what had been recorded. Dad's voice cut through their argument. "The bigger problem is how to handle the extended family situation. Half of them are calling to express concern about our parenting, and the other half are angry about Macy airing family business publicly." "Which relatives are expressing concern?" Jessica asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "Ruth was very upset about the scholarship letters," Mom admitted reluctantly. "She couldn't understand why we wouldn't want Macy to have those opportunities." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that we knew Macy better than some guidance counselor, and we made decisions based on what was best for her emotional and psychological development." "And she bought that?" There was a pause before Dad answered. "She said she needed time to think about everything." "Time to think about everything," Jessica repeated with bitter laughter. "That's code for I can't defend what you did, but I don't want to call you abusive parents directly." I was struck by Jessica's ability to accurately interpret Grandma Ruth's diplomatic response while remaining completely blind to the implications for her own behavior. "The worst part is Marcus from my office," Jessica continued. "Someone sent him copies of Macy's letter, probably Emma or one of the cousins who knows people in the city. Now he's talking about expanding his harassment complaint to include character evidence about my treatment of family members." Mom gasped audibly. "How could family business affect your workplace situation?" "Because it shows a pattern of discriminatory behavior and lack of empathy for people I see as inferior," Jessica said with surprising self-awareness. "If I treat my own sister like garbage, it supports Marcus's claims about how I treat minority colleagues." "You don't treat Macy like garbage," Dad protested. "You two have normal sibling conflicts that Macy blows out of proportion." "Dad," I pushed her down a flight of stairs and broke her wrist. Then I made jokes about her injury while she cooked Christmas dinner with one hand. If that's not treating someone like garbage, what is? I froze at this admission. For the first time since Christmas morning, Jessica was acknowledging the reality of what she had done without minimizing or justifying it. "That was an accident during an argument," Mom said quickly. "No, it wasn't," Jessica replied flatly. "I was angry and I pushed her hard enough to send her tumbling down 15 steps. It wasn't an accident, it was assault. And now there's documented proof that I did it, and you all laughed about it afterward. Jessica, you cannot say things like that. Dad's voice was urgent and frightened. If anyone hears you admitting to assault, it could have legal consequences. Anyone Dad Macy already has medical records of her injury and recordings of us discussing it. The legal consequences already exist whether I admit it or not. Mom's voice became pleading. Sweetheart, you're under enormous stress with the divorce and work situation. You're not thinking clearly about family dynamics. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years, Jessica shot back. Do you want to know what Marcus said when he saw Macy's documentation? He said it explained a lot about my entitled behavior and my belief that I could treat people badly without consequences. Marcus is trying to manipulate you into feeling guilty about normal family relationships, Dad said. Normal families don't hide scholarship opportunities from one child while providing every advantage to another. Normal families don't laugh when someone gets injured. Normal families don't coordinate harassment campaigns against members who ask for accountability. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Jessica was not only acknowledging the abuse, but articulating it more clearly than I had ever managed. You're letting outsiders poison you against your own family, Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm letting outsiders point out things that should have been obvious all along. We treated Macy like crap for her entire life, and when she finally called us on it, we doubled down and tried to make her look crazy. We never tried to make her look crazy, Dad protested. Dad, you told Uncle Dave that she was having a psychotic break and needed psychiatric intervention. You played him edited voicemails to make her sound threatening and dangerous. That's exactly trying to make her look crazy. We were genuinely concerned about her mental state. No, you were genuinely concerned about protecting yourselves from accountability, and now it's backfired because everyone can see the evidence of what actually happened. The conversation continued for another hour with Jessica, surprising me by consistently defending the accuracy of my documentation, while Mom and Dad tried various strategies to minimize or recontextualize the evidence. The question now is what we're going to do about it, Jessica finally said. Do about what? Mom asked. About the fact that we systematically abused Macy for 28 years, and she has comprehensive documentation proving it. We did not systematically abuse anyone, Dad said firmly. Dad, we have recordings of you saying Macy deserves less consideration than me because she's the difficult child. We have documents showing you hid life-changing opportunities from her. We have evidence that you coordinated a campaign to discredit her when she asked for accountability. What would you call that? I would call it a family trying to manage a difficult situation with an unstable family member. By lying to everyone we know and threatening to have her committed, by protecting the family from someone who is clearly having emotional problems and making threats. Jessica laughed bitterly. The only threat Macy made was to tell people the truth, and apparently that was terrifying enough to justify trying to have her declared mentally incompetent. We never actually tried to have her committed, Mom said defensively. No, you just threatened it loudly enough that she felt she needed legal protection, which, by the way, she now has. The conversation ended with Jessica leaving as abruptly as she had arrived, slamming the door behind her again. But this time, the silence that followed felt different. For the first time since Christmas morning, someone in my family had acknowledged the truth about our dysfunction without trying to blame me for it. The golden child had finally seen through the family's protective narratives and recognized her own role in perpetuating abuse. Whether that recognition would lead to meaningful change remained to be seen, but it was more accountability than I had ever expected to receive. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment across town, reviewing the contract for my biggest graphic design project to date. The morning sun streamed through windows that I had chosen myself in a space that reflected my taste rather than my family's expectations. My wrist had healed completely stronger than before, with just a faint scar across the radius bone where it had snapped against the banister. Some mornings I traced that scar with my finger, not with sadness, but with pride. It was evidence that I had survived, that I had healed, and that I had refused to accept abuse as love. The aftermath of my letter campaign had played out exactly as Catherine predicted. My parents initially tried to file harassment charges against me, but their attorney withdrew the case after reviewing my evidence. Apparently, suing someone for telling the truth with documentation was not a winning legal strategy. More importantly, the extended family dynamics had shifted in ways I never expected. Grandma Ruth called me 2 months after receiving my letter, her voice heavy with regret. "Macy, honey, I've been thinking about those scholarship opportunities your parents hid from you. I remember you talking about art school when you were 17, how your eyes lit up when you described your dreams." "I remember those conversations too, Grandma. I should have questioned why those dreams suddenly disappeared. I should have asked more questions when you settled for community college instead of pursuing your artistic education. You couldn't have known what was happening behind closed doors. But I could have paid more attention. I could have noticed that your achievements were never celebrated the way Jessica's were." Her voice broke slightly. "I failed you, sweetheart. I failed to protect you from people who should have been supporting your potential." My relationship with Grandma Ruth had not only survived my truth-telling, but had become deeper and more honest than ever before. She had started sending me checks to help build my freelance business, saying she was making up for the educational support that had been stolen from me. Several cousins had reached out to apologize and rebuild relationships. Emma had become one of my strongest advocates, even confronting her mother about participating in the harassment campaign. "I can't believe I let Aunt Linda convince me you were having mental health problems," Emma told me during one of our regular coffee dates. "You're literally the most stable person I know, and I've known you my entire life." But the most surprising change had come from Jessica herself. 3 months after my letters were delivered, she called me directly for the first time since our confrontation in my apartment. "Macy, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need to say some things." I had almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded different. Smaller, less certain, genuinely vulnerable, rather than manipulatively dramatic. "I've been going to therapy since my divorce was finalized," she continued. "My therapist asked me to describe my family dynamics, and when I talked about how we treated you, she looked horrified." "What did she say?" "She said that pushing someone downstairs was domestic violence and that coordinating family members to gaslight the victim was psychological abuse. She said the way we treated you would be considered criminal behavior between strangers." Jessica paused and I could hear her crying softly. "Macy, I am so sorry. I'm sorry for pushing you down the stairs. I'm sorry for making jokes about your injury. I'm sorry for participating in the campaign to make you look unstable when you were just trying to get acknowledgement for what I did to you." The apology I had wanted for months felt surreal when it finally came. "Why now, Jessica? Why are you apologizing after 6 months of radio silence?" "Because therapy helped me understand that everything Marcus said about my character was true. I am entitled. I do think I'm superior to others. I do believe I deserve special treatment and protection from consequences." She took a shaky breath. And I realized that I learned all of that from watching how our family worked. I was taught that my needs mattered more than yours, that my mistakes could be ignored, while yours were magnified, that I could hurt people without accountability as long as everyone protected my image. "Jessica, I'm not asking for forgiveness, Macy. I don't deserve it, and I understand if you never want to see me again. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to admit it." Jessica had followed up her apology with actions. She had contacted Marcus at her former company to acknowledge that her treatment of him was discriminatory and wrong. She had written letters to several extended family members explaining that my accusations against her were accurate and that she took full responsibility for assaulting me. We had started having occasional coffee meetings, tentative and careful but genuine, in a way our relationship had never been before. Jessica was working to understand her own behavior and make amends where possible, while I was learning to trust that her changes were real rather than strategic. My parents, however, remained locked in their defensive position. They had never acknowledged wrongdoing, never apologized for their favoritism or their harassment campaign. According to relatives who still maintained contact with them, they continued to portray themselves as loving parents who had been unfairly attacked by an ungrateful daughter. I had accepted that reconciliation with them was not possible as long as they refused to acknowledge reality. But I had also discovered that their approval was not necessary for my well-being or success. My freelance design business was thriving in ways it never had when I was constantly doubting myself and accepting the limitations my family had imposed on my dreams. Without their voices in my head, telling me I was too dramatic, too sensitive, too ambitious, I had started pursuing larger projects and more prestigious clients. I had also developed a chosen family of friends who valued and supported me unconditionally. These were people who celebrated my successes without minimizing them, who offered comfort during difficulties without blaming me for causing them, who treated my feelings and perspectives as valid and important. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own perceptions and advocate for my own needs. The voice in my head that used to constantly question whether I was overreacting or being too sensitive had been replaced by clear self-advocacy and boundary setting. When potential clients tried to take advantage of me professionally, I recognized the red flags immediately and terminated those relationships. When friends displayed the kind of minimizing behavior I had grown up with, I addressed it directly rather than accepting it as normal. I had learned the difference between people who genuinely cared about my well-being and people who needed me to stay small for their own comfort. 3 weeks ago, I had received a call that validated all the work I had done to rebuild my life and career. The admissions director from one of the art schools that had offered me a full scholarship 28 years earlier had tracked me down through my professional website. Ms. Parker, I know this is unusual, but I was reviewing old files and found your portfolio from our 1996 scholarship program. Your work was extraordinary, and we were disappointed when you never enrolled. I never received notification about the scholarship, I explained carefully. That's impossible. We sent multiple letters to your home address and tried calling several times. We held your spot for an entire semester hoping you would contact us. I had explained the situation without going into details about family dysfunction, and the director had been appalled that my educational opportunities had been sabotaged. Ms. Parker, I'd like to offer you something unprecedented. Based on your current professional portfolio and your original talent, we'd like to invite you to join our Master of Fine Arts program with full scholarship support. It's never too late to pursue the education you should have had 20 years ago. I was starting the MFA program in the fall, finally pursuing the artistic education that had been stolen from me decades earlier. At 35, I was older than most of my classmates would be, but I had life experience and perspective that would enrich my artistic development. More importantly, I was pursuing this opportunity as someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept limitations imposed by others' insecurities or need for control. As I put the finishing touches on my latest design project, I thought about the journey from that Christmas morning when I lay broken at the bottom of the stairs to this moment of professional success and personal empowerment. The path had been painful, requiring me to confront truths about my family that I had spent decades avoiding. It had meant losing relationships that I had believed were essential to my identity and happiness. But what I had gained was immeasurably more valuable than what I had lost. I had gained the ability to see clearly, to trust my own perceptions, and to demand the respect and consideration that every human being deserves. I had learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, support, and mutual respect. I had discovered that my worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see my value, and that my success isn't dependent on approval from those who benefit from my limitations. Most importantly, I had learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable treatment, both for your own well-being and to give others the opportunity to choose better behavior. My broken wrist had healed stronger than before, and so had my spirit. If you've listened to my story and recognized patterns in your own family relationships, please know that you're not alone, and your perceptions are probably accurate. Trust yourself when something feels wrong, even if everyone around you says it's normal. Document concerning behavior, seek professional support when needed, and remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness by the people who claim to love you. What experiences have you had with family dynamics that made you question what's normal versus what's healthy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming difficult family situations and building healthier relationships. Share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in dealing with family dysfunction. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you trust your own experiences and pursue the relationships and opportunities you truly deserve. Remember, you are worthy of love, support, and respect, regardless of what anyone else might tell you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.